In her father's spacious study with heavy, dark wood furniture sat only 3 people. Cassandra, her younger brother, Bruce, and Mr. Charles the notary. Cassandra knew that one day her beloved parents' lives would be cut short, but she didn't think that her father would be gone just 2 years after her seriously ill mother. Harold was blighted by his heart. After burying his spouse, he complained constantly of chest pains. Then he had a heart attack. Cassandra's father was a businessman and had several branches of his trading firms around the county. He was known to many people, and the children had no need for anything. But that statement was only half true. Bruce's parents loved him more. They supported him from an early age, encouraged any endeavors, and did not punish him severely. Only Cassandra spent her entire childhood hearing the annoying, "You're a girl. You need to be more modest," Harold told his daughter. "When you behave well, everyone notices. Think what she'll say." Mom told Cassandra with a soft rebuke, "Don't bring that Sharon to us again. She's out of our league. But she's my friend. Bruce brings home people he's just met all the time. You don't have to follow Bruce," Mom said sternly. "That's what Father and I are for." Cassandra always felt like she wasn't good enough for her parents, no matter how diligently she studied, no matter what prizes she won for her extracurricular activities, no matter how malleable she was. Bruce was always more important to Mom and Dad. They allowed him many things they would never have allowed their daughter. But despite the frequent injustices, Cassandra thought that her father would definitely divide the property equally among his children in the event of his death. Only Mr. Charles didn't make her happy. "To you, Cassandra," the notary murmured in his voice, "Harold bequeathed to marry Henry Cooper, a tractor driver. He resides in Springfield on Maple Street at number 17. Mr. Charles read the will with complete confidence, but Cassandra still thought the man was joking. "And what does that mean?" She smiled tensely. "Did you make that up on the fly? You know, it's absolutely not funny to me." "Bruce," she turned to her brother, "is that even normal?" "It sounds stupid," he nodded. "No, Cassandra, you haven't misheard. This is your father's last will and testament. What's the joke here? It says so in a certified document. I'm a professional. I don't do silly things like pranks." "Then, what does my father's will leave me? If he has decided to marry me off to some country laborer, then we could certainly use the funds. You dispose of what you have in your bank account. All of Harold's assets and savings, as well as the management of the business, go to Bruce." "Wow!" Bruce shrieked, unable to believe his good fortune. "But how can that be?" whispered a shocked Cassandra. "Why is it like this? What did I do to deserve this? No, I don't believe it. This is some kind of delusion." "Sis, you're screwed." Bruce was clearly having fun. "Good thing I was born a man and no one's forcibly marrying me, and I'll be in charge of the business from now on. Thank you." Father didn't fail you with his anger. Cassandra genuinely didn't understand why Dad had made that particular decision. Bruce knew nothing of his father's last will and testament. He had been so naturally surprised that he now sat with a silly smile. Wow, what luck the fool had been dealt. Cassandra had never thought of her brother as shallow, but he was clearly not interested in the family's affairs. He didn't do well in school. He didn't work at the firm where his father had given him a position. He never showed up. Bruce liked nothing more than to make money from profits, not to work for the company. Cassandra hurried out of her father's office. She couldn't breathe. Tears choked her. She quickly made her way up the stairs and locked herself in her room. Sobs and sobbing could be heard. How could Daddy do this to her? How she wished she could talk to her father now. Prove that she too was worthy of his attention and support. Cassandra would do well in a leadership position. After all, that's what she'd gone to university for, to be a favorite of the lecturers. And what could Bruce do for his business? Only ruin it. He didn't even know what his future responsibilities were. The employees would surely cry out at such a careless boss. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the room. Cassandra reluctantly got up and opened the door for her brother. "But you have to trust your father," he said, instead of words of encouragement. "He would obviously not wish you ill. Surely your fate wasn't decided for you. What have you come for?" To mock. Cassandra gave her brother a disgruntled look. They had never really been friends, but they hadn't had any big fights either. Cassandra and Bruce had always had two different interests. "In any case, you must act on your father's will," Bruce stated with such arrogance, as if he thought he was her late father. "What do you think? I'm in your power now. Do you think you can control me?" "This house is mine now," Bruce told her, with undisguised pleasure. "You better listen to my advice, and you'll be in the chocolate too." Cassandra was amazed at the quick change in her brother's demeanor. Such people definitely shouldn't be given power because they would begin to abuse it. Half the night, Cassandra could not sleep. All sorts of thoughts kept her awake. How could she accept the fact that her father had deprived her of her will? She had a good education. She could take care of herself at 27. But it's like her dad cut her out of the family. Why would he pick some poor man from the backwoods to marry her? As crazy as the idea was, Cassandra decided she had to at least meet this Henry Cooper. She couldn't wait to find out how he and her father knew each other and what Henry had to gain from marrying her. Be that as it may, Cassandra decided she wasn't just going to give up. She would figure it all out. Maybe the will was fake, since the entire family fortune went to Bruce alone. He could have had a hand in it. She doubted her brother could have done it on his own. No, there was no need to suspect the only family member she had left. But would he treat her as an equal now? The next morning, just after breakfast, Cassandra contacted Mr. Charles. "Good morning," she addressed the already up-and-about notary. "Can you give me that Henry's contacts and the will?" "Good morning, Cassandra. Have you made up your mind after all?" he inquired. "Nothing's decided yet, but I have to at least understand what's going on at all. I don't believe my father could do this to me. I've known Harold for years, and he wouldn't just do nothing." "Just nothing," he repeated in syllables. "You made a sensible decision." Calming down a little after the intriguing remark, Cassandra dialed the right number, and after only a few beeps, she heard a pleasant male voice. Yes, who am I speaking to? Hello, this is Cassandra Brown. Does my name mean anything to you? Pretty much, yes. The man agreed stoically. Didn't think I'd be contacted. Thought it was a prank. I was also, shocked by the news of my marriage to you. Would it be convenient for you if I stopped by today? I don't want to discuss something like this over the phone. Of course, not until after 4. I'm at work until then, Henry agreed. Cassandra didn't know what to expect, but bravely headed out into the suburbs. She imagined what the man her father had chosen to be her husband must look like, but she couldn't focus. She pulled up to Henry's house at 5:30 in the evening, taking a bag of cakes from the back seat. Cassandra decided that a little hospitality would help her feel more confident. She entered the yard through the unlocked gate of the red brick house, which clearly hid at least 4 rooms inside. There were outbuildings in the yard, and the grounds appeared well maintained. The paths were tiled. An 8-year-old girl responded to a knock on the front door, noticing a stranger on the doorstep. "There's an auntie here." "Come quickly," shouted the girl. "Hi." Cassandra said hello, but the little girl disappeared immediately. Henry came limping out of the room, followed by 2 boys about 10 years old. The children looked at the visitor curiously. "Go to the nursery," their father said to them in a calm tone of voice, and they obeyed the first time. "Hello. Come in, please," Henry invited. Cassandra noted that Henry was not much older than she was. He was 32 at the most, and he already had 3 children. Were they really all his? Henry invited her into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and gratefully accepted the bag of cakes. He called Linda over and gave her a plate of sweets. "How did you know my father? Does he owe you a debt of gratitude? I don't see why I'm obliged to marry you. You must admit it. It's silly. We are complete strangers, after all," Cassandra began. "The situation is certainly strange," Henry agreed. For some reason, not looking her in the eye. "I've never met your father personally, but I had a visit from his notary recently. He said a couple of months ago that my name was mentioned in a certain businessman's will for marrying his daughter, but he didn't give a specific amount. Now, I realized it was about you. I didn't put up any resistance in my position. So it's perfectly normal for you to enter into a marriage of convenience." Cassandra was even a little upset. She had hoped Henry would turn out to be much more honorable. She wanted to believe that her father had chosen for her, albeit simple, a worthy man to be her life partner. "I am as puzzled as you are, but I did not grow up well off. I have 3 children on me now. I am a single father. Megan, my late wife, died while giving birth to Jack and Jerry. When we found out we were having twins, we were crazy happy. And then I became both a father and a widower overnight. So the offer to get married and get paid for it with money, I'll never make sounds very attractive," Henry continued. He picked at his mug of tea with a spoon and was quiet for a moment. "My mom helps me, but she's not well at all right now. She needs expensive medication to keep her stable. But I can only afford the cheap analogs, and they aren't as effective." Cassandra sighed. She realized that her problems were nowhere near Henry's. He dealt with a lot of hardships every day, but he wasn't discouraged. If she were him, she wouldn't turn down a lucrative offer to get rich either. Jack has a heart defect, but that was recently found out. Turns out it doesn't just happen congenitally. Henry shared in an all too sad voice. I don't know how I'm going to take it all. And about a month ago, I got in a car accident because of some idiot. Now I'm limping, which doesn't help the job at all. Tractor driver, though in demand in our town, is a pretty stressful job, isn't it? You know, I can't promise that I'll listen to my father and do as he wrote in his will. But I really wish you could get the money you were promised, Cassandra said. I know they will make your life very easy, but you must also understand me. I've been instructed to marry a man I know absolutely nothing about. We may see each other periodically, get to know each other. I don't know what will come of it. Cassandra shrugged. She didn't linger on her visit. The children rushed out of the room to see her off. They were curious as to who exactly their guest was. Henry did not hide anything from the children and tried to explain to them all the difficulties they had to face. Cassandra had been out of contact with Henry for several days, pondering what to do next. After her father's funeral, she hadn't seen much of her friends. They were in no hurry to help and comfort her in her predicament. Bruce, on the other hand, went on a rampage. What is this? You show up drunk again, Cassandra scolded at her brother, dragging him to the couch in the living room on the ground floor. And how could you be put in charge of everything? Don't you have to mourn your father anymore? Going wild, she resented him. Know your place, Bruce muttered unintelligibly. I'm the boss now. I can kick you out. Cassandra didn't actually take her drunken brother's words seriously. He'd always thought highly of himself. No wonder he'd become arrogant. Being alone with Bruce was getting harder and harder. He was always teasing Cassandra about how her father had left her nothing, and how she'd decided to be mother to Henry Cooper's entire brood. You're such a jerk, Cassandra glared. Taking the bags of gifts she had bought for Henry's children, she left the house. She had visited them twice already and had stayed in good spirits after her visit. They just chatted more without bringing up the marriage or their difference in position. Cassandra was offended by Bruce's jokes, for she enjoyed spending time with Henry. He didn't try to develop their relationship in any way to get them married and rich. Henry appeared calm, well-mannered, and also, to Cassandra's surprise, easy to handle with his boys. I wonder how you manage to be a wonderful father, she said with a smile, watching as the children sat at the round kitchen table and diligently jotted down numbers and letters from a rough draft in their notebooks. It's hard, but you have to be strict as well as understanding. Now that my mom can't help me, I'm even more imbued with their little problems. It's important to listen to your child, Henry replied. He trusts you more too, my little ones. He knows how hard money is. Yes, they're not cranky at all, Cassandra confirmed. I wasn't taken care of like that as a child. She sighed and motioned for Henry to go outside for a while. Let's walk around the neighborhood. I don't get out of town much. It's so peaceful here, Henry eagerly replied and waved to the children. What were your parents busy doing? Since they weren't paying attention. They weren't bad people, but my little brother always came first for them. They forgave him everything, supported him, entertained him, and I always managed on my own. It's a shame and unfair to the child. But you seem to have grown up to be a good person. You're sensitive, caring. I don't think your brother has those qualities. Henry put his hand on Cassandra's back very briefly as a sign of encouragement. But she was very pleased and excited. She liked him more and more with each meeting. But Cassandra was afraid to admit it. She felt at ease with him and didn't even want to go back to the city. Stay with us for dinner. It is a sincere request. The children adore you, and not just for the presents, Henry said with a smile. Oh, and I wouldn't mind spending more time in your company. I don't have many friends right now. And you know, you give off such a warmth. I feel like I've known you for a long time. Me too, Cassandra admitted, lowering her head. Henry stopped suddenly. He took her hand and looked into her eyes. In that instant, everything became clear to both of them. From then on, Cassandra took more and more work from home. She didn't work for any of the firms Bruce now ran, but her bosses were just as successful. The position allowed her to stay out of the office for a few days, which she took advantage of. Cassandra spent a lot of time with Henry's family and had begun to bond with Megan, his mother. Well, it won't be long before we're married. They teased as they watched Cassandra enjoy setting the table for the children's return from school. You say that too. Cassandra waved it off. She thought her father was right. The feeling between her and Henry grew stronger every day. They could no longer be apart for long periods of time. They traveled to see each other all the time and couldn't stand it anymore. We should get married and live together, Henry said simply, when left alone with his lover. You see how it all happened. And you were worried. Amazing. Cassandra laughed softly so as not to disturb the children playing in the next room. And you can make surgeries close. That's not why I'm suggesting it, Henry immediately snapped back. I know. I'm not blaming you. I wonder how much is in there. I hope my father didn't hurt you with the payment. There must have been a reason for him to reward you so. He rewarded me with you. Henry smiled and kissed his bride. Cassandra had little contact with her brother. She had moved to the suburbs and traveled into the city twice a week to appear at the office in front of her superiors. Two close friends were surprised to hear about the changes in Cassandra's personal life, but they agreed to come to the wedding. The bride and groom decided to play in the suburbs while the weather was good. They invited only the closest people. What am I doing out there? Bruce smirked when his sister stopped by his workplace to call him personally to the celebration. I thought you were smarter than that, wouldn't indulge your father's incredible desires. He was old, so he made up this ridiculousness. You're out of your mind. But I was right. Henry's a good man. Better than any of the people who tried to make friends with me around here. I don't know if I'm coming or not, but I'll think about it. Bruce replied with a smug look. I don't have much time for fun now. You know, I can't figure out what's what. There's always something they want from me. Cassandra felt bad that her only family man couldn't spare at least a day for her sake. She supposed Bruce couldn't handle what their father had put on him. And in her heart, she was even a little glad about it. Only Bruce's policies had quickly bankrupted the firm. Cassandra realized that. The modest outdoor wedding party was attended by no more than 40 people. Cassandra and Henry sat surrounded by their children at a separate table decorated with flowers. The guests were seated at 2 long tables on either side of them, and in the center was a space for dancing. It's a lot of fun here. Mary jumped up to the newlyweds. She was wearing a soft pink dress in which she looked bold. Cassandra stroked her head, feeling her spouse take her hand. "We did well, didn't we?" Henry whispered in her ear, looking round at the satisfied guests. "You're right. It's just a shame. Bruce never made it." At that moment, as if on cue, an expensive car stopped in front of the gates of the house, and from it, Bruce came to the open gate. He moved with a shaky gait. Cassandra immediately rose from her seat. "Do you know why that bloke married my sister?" "Because of money. He's a con artist." "He's hardly a man," Bruce shouted. "Shut up now," his sister shouted at him. Henry was already on his way to quiet the troublemaker. "You're blind because of your crush. He's going to get a considerable amount of money because of the wedding, by the way," Bruce continued. Henry grabbed Bruce by the arms and dragged him outside. The driver helped shove him into the back seat and drove him away. The guests watched with open mouths as the spectacle unfolded and began to discuss what they had seen. Despite the humiliation, Henry took his seat next to his wife. "I'm sorry. I didn't even know he was so..." Cassandra began. "It's not your fault," Henry muttered through gritted teeth. "But how did he know about the money? Apart from the notary, no one could have known." Cassandra was angry at her brother, but was glad that Henry would now be able to receive the payment. When the couple arrived at the bank, they were surprised by the generous amounts Harold had left behind. "I didn't realize Daddy had spread himself so thin," Cassandra muttered, still in disbelief at what was happening. "I thought that was about how much he would pass on to me in his will." "He thought highly of you," Henry teased her, "but you can exhale." Cassandra stroked her husband's shoulder. "There should be enough here for Jack's checkup and treatment. Oh, and Megan will now be getting the medicine she needs. I think there might even be enough for a house renovation or a new one. Yes. Thank you for being in my life." Henry hugged his spouse right at the bank, not shying away from the specialist chatting with them. "I'm happy to have you, and grateful to your father." Jack worried, visiting numerous doctors with his dad and mom. Cassandra was glad that her lover's children accepted her quickly and didn't try to break them up. They called her Mom easily. No one had asked them to. "Don't be afraid, little one," Cassandra comforted Jack. "You're in good hands. This hospital has the best doctors in the world. They'll take care of you. And Daddy and I will be there for you. Before you know it, they'll be bringing you back from surgery." "Mom's right, son." Henry leaned over to his son. "Okay," Jack agreed, squeezing his parents' hands. "I'll be brave." At home, Jack was greeted like a hero after his successful surgery. Megan couldn't visit her grandchildren in the hospital because of her condition, but after a few days of taking the right medication, she felt much better. God sent you to us, Megan said to Cassandra with tears in her eyes. Everything has changed with you. My son is happy now. We're getting better. Oh, I'm glad, Cassandra replied with a happy smile. She and Henry decided how they would spend the rest of the money from their father's inheritance. Life went on as usual. Old grudges were being forgotten. Cassandra's frustration at Bruce's terrible behavior faded into the background. But she still cared. Why her father had chosen to associate her with Henry? How did he know him? Why did he feel the need to bring them together? Doesn't it bother you anymore? She asked Henry before she went to bed when he had already kissed her and settled down next to her with his eyes closed. It's weird, but there's no one to ask now. You're right, but maybe we should investigate. Cassandra insisted. Hire a detective, for instance. We should check with Mr. Charles. He's sure to know someone. I agree. Henry stood up and looked at her carefully. Money doesn't just appear out of nowhere. There has to be a reason. We can't be related. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been told to get married. Then what? I don't know what I could have done to please your father to reward me like this. Out of all the men in town worthy of you, he chose a lame tractor driver, a widower with a sick mother and 3 children. With all that, I doubt he loved you. But he was right. What made us meet? Oh, yeah. It's like Dad knew how things would turn out, Cassandra said thoughtfully. Tomorrow, I'll get the detective's contact details and make arrangements with him. I won't rest until I know the truth. Nicholas, whose contacts Mr. Charles had shared with Cassandra, was clever. When she met him, Cassandra didn't know that he was working for his own gain and didn't respect the confidentiality of the information he received. Bruce had also used his services earlier. Only Nicholas didn't warn Cassandra about that. It's not an easy job, you know. That's why I charge a lot. The detective said it at once. Of course, I understand. I need to know something about my husband and father's past. Nicholas immediately brightened up. What? You suspect your spouse of adultery or collusion? I've seen a lot of things in my job, so feel free to speak freely. No, my husband is faithful to me. I know that for a fact. That's not what this is about. After telling Nicholas the whole story, Cassandra drove home. She was anxious to hear the results, even though Nicholas didn't inspire confidence. How did you like him? Henry asked, meeting his wife at the cooker. Megan was helping her son chop salads. He was weird, like he was trying to get all the information out of me. But despite Cassandra's skepticism, Nicholas was ready to provide the data in a week. They met at the cafe. They took a far table so as not to draw attention to themselves. The thing is, Cassandra, your father and your husband's father were close friends. They started a business together from scratch and did everything they could to get it going. At that time, there was an influx of criminal elements offering roofs to promising businessmen. Your father agreed to pay them off with some money. But Alex, Henry's father, did not indulge them out of carelessness. He had upset an important man who was harassing his family. Alex was afraid of reprisals, so he ran away. His wife was the first to die. Then he decided to hide his infant son with Megan, who your husband considers his birth mother. She raised him and never told a living soul where the child came from. Wow, Cassandra exhaled. She was angry at her father, but she hadn't thought his story would be so sad and noble. So Dad was just helping a friend in distress. And if Henry's parents had stayed alive, he would have grown up to be a completely different person, wouldn't have faced so many hardships. Exactly. Nicholas nodded. Alex left his entire fortune in his son's name and hoped that one day he would get it. He asked Harold to bring their children together as a token of friendship. It's amazing that you really fell in love with each other and decided to get married. I often deal with family secrets, but this one struck me. It's nice to know that it's based on great friendship and not greed. Nicholas said it in a tone as if he didn't believe it himself. He's definitely a professional, Cassandra thought. He knew exactly what his customers wanted to hear from him, though it didn't seem as if Nicholas held the same high moral values. Thank you for your work. You've been a great help. Cassandra expressed her sincere gratitude, but decided she wouldn't use his services again. The second installment is in this envelope. Good day to you. Henry was shocked by what he heard from his wife. He asked his mother to confirm what the private investigator had said. I couldn't tell you. I was taken at my word, Megan apologized. I'm sorry, my boy. I raised you, my boy. I raised you like you were my own. I always wanted a son, but God never gave me one. Mom, it's not your fault. Henry hugged her. You did everything you could to raise me, and you're still helping me. I'm so glad I have 3 grandchildren. It's such a blessing. There will be a 4th soon, Cassandra said with a smile. I wanted to tell you right away, but this investigation... Cassandra, Henry whispered in such awe that the women's eyes immediately filled with tears. We're having a baby. I can't believe it. The couple embraced, and Megan's hands reached for her daughter-in-law's still obscure belly. Oh, young people, well done. Congratulations. It's a good thing we have enough rooms for so many kids. Cassandra felt serene in her life once again. She was happily married with loving relatives under one roof. She was preparing to become a mum, and all her thoughts were occupied only with this wonderful event. Cassandra let go of her resentment towards her father after learning his motives. He had never forgotten about her. He believed she would be happy with Henry, and they would have enough money for the family. At some point over the course of a few days, Cassandra started getting harassed on social media by friends, their parents, and acquaintances. Well, they're poking their noses into my business again, aren't they? Henry sighed, seeing his wife's frustrated face. They've had enough. It's okay. Bruce doesn't keep his mouth shut. I don't know why he'd want to mess with me all of a sudden. He almost got what he deserved after his drunken stunt at the wedding. Now he's telling everyone he meets how he's decided to marry me off to his friend's son, making it look like I married you, so I wouldn't be disinherited. How did he even know about the money in my account? Did he find out from the bank? He laughed at me from the start. Dad left him everything. He left me a fiancée. He must have found out how much you got in his will, and now he's jealous. But the thing is, it's not our father's money. It's yours. He has nothing to do with it. Wherever he found out about it, he has no right to claim it. Cassandra said angrily, raising her voice with each new word. Hush, dear. Don't get worked up over that idiot, Henry reassured her. Our baby doesn't need any more excitement. It's all right with Bruce. I've shut up all the nosy people who text you, and you don't open any more of their messages. Henry was angry about Bruce's defiant behavior. He didn't understand why a man who had inherited his dead parents' entire fortune would cling to his sister like that. Isn't it enough for him what he got? No. Henry would not allow his wife to be bullied, especially not in this position. He was sick of seeing Cassandra upset. That evening, Henry rang the bell at the huge gate of Cassandra's ancestral home, where Bruce now lived in proud solitude. Warren, what do you want? Came a mocking voice from the intercom. I'm not giving you charity. You've got plenty of money of your own, as it turns out. Come out. We need to talk, Henry insisted. Or can you just hide? Leave my family alone. Cassandra's pregnant, and she doesn't need your bullying. Wow, you've already got a fourth, Bruce said snidely. So, I'm an uncle with many children. You're not going near my kids. And forget about your sister. You don't want to sick crazy fools on her writing nasty things to her. For your information, my inheritance has nothing to do with your family's money. I got it from my own father. Yeah, I know. So what? A private investigator snitched on your little investigation. So why do you want it? Not enough thrills in your life. Then you upset Cassandra again, and no walls will help you. She was pleased that her husband had interceded, but Cassandra didn't want Bruce to get back at him for threatening her. Turns out I didn't know my brother very well all this time. He used to get on my parents' nerves, and it was like I didn't exist to him. Now he's bored. He's got me, Cassandra said bitterly, feeling her husband's arms around her. It's better not to touch him. He'll get over it and leave me alone. But you suffer for it, don't you? No, I won't let him bully me, Henry said indignantly. Who gave him the right to harass you? He has his life, and we have ours. Keep him out of ours. Keep him out of ours. Bruce might retaliate because you hurt his ego. He's a coward at heart. You've exposed him for what he is. Cassandra's fears were confirmed when her neighbor Vivienne called her the next day. What's wrong? The police just picked up your Henry. Rounded him up on the spot. Didn't really explain anything. All he did was yell that he didn't kill anybody. He didn't, Cassandra repeated, her insides shattering. What had happened? She immediately hung up, forgetting to thank Vivienne, and started calling her husband. Take it, Cassandra said angrily, pacing restlessly around the room. What's wrong? Megan came over to her. My girl, what are you so worried about? Henry's been taken to the police. I don't understand. He's not answering his phone. I'm gonna go to the farm. I have to find out. You better sit down. We'll get to the bottom of this. Megan led her sister-in-law to the couch and pushed her shoulders down. Don't fuss, honey. If it's serious, they'll tell us. The local precinct officer knew nothing about Henry's affairs. But soon, Cassandra received a phone call. There's been an attempt on your Bruce's life tonight. He's in a coma now, so he can't tell us anything. Your husband is the only suspect, the policeman's voice explained. You're out of your mind. Why would Henry do this? He was home all night, went to work as usual. Nothing suspicious, Cassandra insisted. We'll bring you in for questioning. Can I talk to him? She asked hopefully. Cassandra could not believe that something terrible was happening to their family again. You can come by after 2. Henry in the detention center now, waiting to be questioned. Cassandra and Megan burst into tears of helplessness and fear. They didn't know how to tell their children what had happened. By now, the whole neighborhood must have known what Henry had been accused of. You can't hide something like that. Megan stayed at home, waiting for her grandchildren to return from school, while Cassandra went into town. Don't drive too fast, daughter, her mother-in-law said, adjusting a light scarf around her neck. Everything will be all right. We just need to sort it out. I'll call you as soon as there's news, Cassandra promised and set off. She held on for a long time. The hardships she had endured, the coldness of her parents as a child had hardened her. Cassandra was hardly a crier. But when she saw Henry in handcuffs, tears sprang from her eyes in uncontrollable streams. And remember, no touching, the policeman repeated to her, leaving the couple alone in the conference room. Honey, how are you doing? Did they hurt you? No. Don't worry. I've got normal guys in the cell with me. Harmless thieves, drunks, no hardcore thugs. What happened? I haven't seen Bruce yet. They say he's in a coma. At first I thought he'd set something up to teach you a lesson. I told you not to go to him. Cassandra, calm down. I'm nervous too. Your brother was stabbed in his house. The cameras in the yard were off, but I was the last person on the film. I went to see him yesterday. Only Bruce wouldn't come out to me. You know, we talked on the intercom. I never saw him. I believe you, honey. I believe you. Cassandra jerked her hand to touch her husband, but immediately came to her senses. I think it's a coincidence that someone attacked Bruce the same night you visited him. They think you have a motive because our strained relationship with Bruce is well known. Somebody could have used that to frame you. That's what I told the investigator. He seems okay. Name's Ashley. No luck at all this year. Yeah, that car accident that left you with a limp. And the attempted murder charge. Cassandra nodded. On the way home, she thought about what her husband had said. He'd had an accident after meeting Mr. Charles. Alex had said, the accident was stupid. Not even a novice driver makes that kind of mistake behind the wheel. But someone still hurt his leg. What if it was intentional? We'd have to start with Nicholas. If he was reporting to Bruce about his and Henry's family affairs, it doesn't seem like any principle would stop him from telling outsiders. Having obtained the investigator's number, Cassandra called him as soon as she got home. Good evening, Ashley. This is Cassandra Cooper, wife of the detainee Henry Cooper. I'll text you the contact details of the private investigator we contacted. Check him out, please. He might know something. Nicholas likes to divulge confidential information. Cassandra spent the rest of the evening with her family. The children snuggled on the bed with her, worrying about the fate of their daddy. He would be released soon. It's not his fault, Cassandra said softly as the children fell asleep. The police would check it out and let him go. That's their job. That's their job. That's their job. They have to investigate suspicious events. Mom, do you promise? Jack asked in a sleepy voice, still hesitant to go to his room to sleep. Oh, of course, I promise. Dad, we'll come back. Don't worry, Cassandra told them, though she was worried sick. Nicholas cracked pretty quickly in the interrogation. At first, he held his ground, but he didn't want to be an accessory to attempted murder. We didn't have a written confidentiality agreement with Cassandra. Nicholas was stubborn at first, but he quickly gave in. He said, with an air of importance that oral agreements were not responsible. Ashley said wryly, I'm sure if we did a good job of digging into your dealings with your customers, we'd find something else you didn't honor. Your services aren't cheap. And new customers will definitely turn away if they find out how easily you disclose personal information to third parties. The threat worked on Nicholas. He wasn't as tough as he thought he was. Okay. You don't have to say anything to anyone. He adjusted his jacket. Bruce approached me. I didn't realize that finding out about her husband and her sister's life would hurt him so much. I prefer not to get involved in such stories. I don't want to get into trouble with criminals. But Bruce couldn't hurt himself. Ashley pressed Nicholas. What are you hiding? There was another man interested in Henry's fate. He paid me handsomely, and your boundaries of confidentiality have blurred, Ashley said with a sneer. Well, sort of. Nicholas began to deny it. His name was Ray. I didn't look at his passport, so I don't know his last name, but he asked me all about Henry Cooper's life, about his wife, and what she asked me to know. He was also interested in the gratuity Cassandra's father had left in his account for Henry, if he married her. This man's name won't tell us anything. Do you remember him well? Can you describe him to our sketch artist? Of course. Anything to help the investigation, Nicholas said with a smile. Soon Ashley had a sketch of the other suspect in the attempt on Bruce's life. Cassandra was at her brother's hospital when she received a message from the investigator with Ray's portrait. Hello. Do you know this man? Ashley asked into the phone. First time I've seen him. Who is he? His name is actually Ray Wilson, and he's a third cousin of your husband's late father. They're taking him down to the station now. I'll let you know as soon as there's any news. Thank you very much, Cassandra replied cheerfully and hung up the phone. Bruce lay in a pile of wires, with instruments running around him. Cassandra was ready to forgive her brother for anything, as long as he came to his senses. The next morning, as Cassandra walked the children to school, she received a phone call. She picked up the phone without looking at the screen, hoping Ashley would give her the good news. Hi, honey. came Henry's satisfied voice. "I'm being released. They got the perp." "Oh my God!" Cassandra exclaimed and shouted to her mother-in-law. She didn't wait long and was already listening to her son's words over the speakerphone. "Henry, honey, come home soon. We're all worried here." "I'll be home today, Mom. Don't worry. I'm free," he said happily. He wanted to scream at how elated he felt. "I want to kiss you all so much. You must have been scared, huh?" "Yes, especially the children." "I'll pick you up," Cassandra said. I'll pick you up," Cassandra said. "I'd like you to come with me to face this scoundrel who calls himself my relative. He almost killed your brother. Bruce may be a nasty bloke, but he didn't deserve that." Cassandra was glad that her husband was sober about Bruce. They might not have been good friends, but she held out hope of mending her relationship with her brother. After all, he no longer had anyone close to him, and he could use the family's support in times of need. When Henry saw his wife, his spirits finally lifted. My darling," he lifted her off the ground and hugged her. "It's so good to see you. And you, little one." He touched his belly to his beloved wife's belly. "You're reunited now," Ashley came up to them. "Where's that bastard?" Cassandra's face immediately changed from a wide smile to an angry look. Ray's in a cell right now." Is that the gray-haired man they put in the next cell last night?" "That's him," Ashley nodded. "I suggest we watch his interrogation." Cassandra and Henry were allowed into the interrogation room and was shown the tape of Ray's interrogation. He looked harmless. Average height, rather elderly and thin. I never thought a man like that could hurt someone so badly," Cassandra sighed. "So you're ready to make a full confession?" Ashley's voice came over the tape. I am. I'll get a lesser sentence for it," Ray asked. Wishing he could get away with it at any cost, he continued. "Yeah, I tried to kill Bruce, but it didn't work. He's in a coma now, I know, but I didn't want to. I wanted to take him out to frame Henry. If he went to prison, I'd get his money. I'm the last adult blood relative." "You're a fool," Ashley's young partner said, but he cut him off. For your information," Ashley said, "Henry had a will in favor of his 3 children." Cassandra couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was really stupid. She marveled at Ray's naivety and cruelty. "And by the way, he faked the accident," Ashley said to Henry. "But you only got off with a leg injury." "Thank you." Henry shook Ashley's hand, hugged Cassandra, and walked out of the police station with her. "I just want to put this behind me. We have so much more to do back home." Henry and Cassandra were greeted with tears and loud baby cries. Linda and her brothers flanked their father on all sides and wouldn't let them pass. "Daddy's home. You don't have anything to worry about now. I'm not going anywhere else. I promise," Henry said, kissing everyone in turn. Cassandra visited Bruce for about a week, and then a miracle happened. He had come to his senses after all. Bruce coughed, finding a tube in his throat. "Get a doctor! Get a doctor!" shouted a terrified Cassandra into the corridor as Bruce tried to stand up. No. No. Calm down. Calm down. It's okay. You're in the hospital. The medics who came running to the screams quickly calmed Bruce down and laid him back down. Welcome to this world. The doctor smiled at him. How are you feeling? Very well, Bruce mumbled. I need some water. Hello. Hello. Cassandra came up to him and touched his arm. You're awake at last. I was worried. Bruce looked away and refrained from answering. Now he realized how badly he had treated his sister. He'd been on the verge of death after hurting her. She still wouldn't turn her back on him. I have good news for you, Cassandra said as she moved closer to his bed. The perpetrator has been caught. He won't be able to hurt anyone else. I'm sorry, Bruce said quietly, not looking her in the eye. I behaved terribly. I didn't deserve your support. I'm glad you understand. I've already forgiven you. But remember, I will not tolerate any more bullying, bad behavior towards me or my family. If you want to keep in touch, please respect my loved ones. Okay, I understand, Bruce replied, still avoiding his sister's gaze. After his discharge, he visited Cassandra's family home and brought back many gifts. Let's forget old grudges, Henry said to him on the doorstep and held out his hand. As soon as Bruce shook it, he was immediately enveloped in a hug. And don't spoil me again. The children, Jack and Jerry, received Bruce warily. But he managed to melt his nephew's hearts with lots of toys and sweets. You spoiled them? Cassandra declared with feigned displeasure. She had hoped Bruce would change his behavior, but she hadn't expected him to fit into their family so well. When he wasn't looking at everyone with an arrogant stare or making hurtful jokes, he seemed quite easygoing and fun. Uncle Bruce would chase him round all 4 rooms to play hide and seek with him. Just a little more, please. Guys, I'm already tired. I'm exhausted. Megan laughed as she saw her grandchildren corralling her guest. Leave your uncle alone. You don't want him to never come to see you again. Putting the disagreement behind her, Cassandra enjoyed a peaceful life with her spouse. She had survived the accident. It was now more difficult for her to get around due to a leg injury, and she was still working remotely. Why was Henry nagging her? You're living your job, aren't you? Maybe you should think about starting your own business. What do you suggest? Cassandra sat under her husband's side and rested her head on his shoulder. By the way, Bruce was saying the other day that his firm has a position for you. He realizes that raising 4 will be more difficult now. He really has changed. Henry smiled, finding common ground with his wife's brother. I'd like my own business, not to go under someone else's authority, even if it's your brother. Especially if it's my brother, Cassandra corrected her husband. Who knows how long Bruce will be good? Natured, he might get twisted. What exactly would you like to do? How about opening a bistro in town? How do you feel about that? Of course, we wouldn't start until the baby or the little one's born. But, by the way, when are we due for an ultrasound? Cassandra herself had thought about starting her own business that wouldn't depend on her brother, but she was afraid of Henry's reaction. She didn't think he'd be set on doing something in the city and leaving his life in the suburbs behind. If we get our own business, we're going to have to move from here to the city and do it all, aren't we? Our employees will definitely need us at all hours of the day and night at first. Otherwise, it won't work. There's not much keeping me here. We can look for a big house in town so we can all fit in. We'll have to find out from Mom if she wants to live with us or alone, Henry reasoned. Would you mind if she came with us? Would you mind if she came with us? I'm great with her, and she can help with the baby at first. If she wants to, of course, Cassandra replied. The months leading up to the birth flew by. By this time, the couple had found a decent house in the city. Bruce helped them with the purchase, and Cassandra accepted his help. The children were placed in a new school, and Megan had her own large bedroom on the ground floor. She quickly made friends with a neighbor her own age and bragged about her children and grandchildren to her. I'm glad everyone likes it here, Henry said, as he watched the little ones in their yard playing in their own playground that the previous owners of the house had built. Yeah, there's a lot of space for them here and a lot of fun things to do, and there are hardly any kids left in the suburbs. The day Cassandra's water broke, the whole family was eagerly awaiting the arrival of their baby girl. In the corridor of the maternity ward, the children sat still, not bothering anyone. They were excited that Mom would soon have a real baby instead of a belly. Cassandra was lucky to have a midwife. It was an older woman. I love my job. It'll be over soon. Honey, try harder, Mrs. Emma was saying, and you could hear the strength in her voice. I can't do it anymore, Cassandra shouted. But Mrs. Emma never stopped talking to her and admonishing her. When little Caroline was born, Cassandra cried tears of relief and happiness as she took her daughter in her arms for the first time. Congratulations, you did a good job. The midwife smiled. Do you know, I've seen a mole like that before. Mrs. Emma pointed to Cassandra's wrist, where a long cross-shaped spot stood out. About 30 years ago, a woman in labor had one in the same spot. Is there such a coincidence? Cassandra asked, confused. Her thoughts were now completely occupied with her daughter. That woman is dead. Her baby girl was put up for adoption. You should check your parentage, Mrs. Emma advised. She stroked Cassandra's head and went about her business. Cassandra told her husband everything over the phone, as no one was allowed into the young mum's room. You think you're adopted? Henry wondered, looking at his tiny daughter, who was uncomfortable looking through the glass. Probably. We need to tell Bruce and get his consent for a DNA test. It's only fair. If it's confirmed, he might as well stop talking to us. Her husband hesitated. He suggested we do the test and keep the results just for ourselves. Nothing will change. But I will understand why Dad left everything to him. So I'm not his own daughter, Cassandra thought to herself. Still, it's strange to raise a child as your own all your life and then to have it turn around like this. Bruce took his sister's request calmly. Cassandra gave him a chagrined look during the discharge when they were all posing for pictures. I never thought you were adopted. It might not be true, Either way, it doesn't matter. Let me hold this little princess. Bruce held out his hands to Caroline. What's the right way to hold them there? The DNA results came back. A fortnight later, Mrs. Emma's assumption was confirmed. Bruce and Cassandra were not blood relatives. Should I ask Ashley to find out about my parents? Cassandra asked her husband. Well, if you need to, let's ask. He seems like a good man, reliable, would approach him as an assistant or colleague. Through Ashley's efforts, it became known that Gwen, my biological mother, had become pregnant with me at an early age, but was not afraid of it. My father, Peter, wanted to build a strong family. He got caught in a storm while out on a boat. It was swept out to sea, and he was blown off course. Cassandra told Henry in a shaky voice. He didn't quit. He didn't betray Mom. She was heartbroken, but she wasn't going to put me in an orphanage. She decided to raise me on her own, except that complications in childbirth took her life. Cassandra was glad she had learned the truth. She realized that her birth parents certainly wouldn't have neglected her if they were still alive. Henry and Cassandra rented the bistro when Caroline was a year old. The couple shared equally in responsibilities and raising their children, so they took their time growing the business. If you need any help, feel free to contact me, Bruce assured her. I have a lot of people I know in the food service industry who can share their experience. We can get together over lunch with some of them sometime. Thanks, Cassandra, with Caroline in her arms, pecked her brother on the cheek. Are you going to your uncle's? She held out her youngest daughter to her brother. Give her here. I need to practice, Bruce said, embarrassed. What does that mean? Your Inessa is pregnant. It's not like we've even seen her. It just so happens. But we...
The mother-in-law kicked the village orphan daughter-in-law out the door, and after a while of seeing her, numbers were crucial in Nayli's life. And could it be otherwise with more than 40 years of accounting experience? Immediately after the institute, she was assigned to a food processing plant, where she worked faithfully for more than 10 years, until the collapse of the union. The combine was drowning in debts, and by the mid-90s finally collapsed. While others ran in panic about tomorrow, Nayli, then still Nayli, quickly realized who takes control of the market and through old connections got a job in a construction company, which was run by brothers. Nayli faithfully kept the books, often received good gifts from the bosses for labor in the form of cognac and expensive foreign candy. Nayli was not ashamed to participate in the dubious affairs of the owners of the company, then secured a spacious 2-room apartment in the center of the city for nothing. Figures never let her down. She could rely on them and only on them. The dashing 90s were replaced by the new millennium. Gradually, loopholes and holes in the laws and taxation system became less and less. It was no longer possible to pull off the old schemes, and the legitimacy of her employer's business was becoming more and more suspicious. Nayli prudently quit her job when she realized that she smelled a stink and went to work in the university accounting department. The pay there, of course, was more modest, but it was peaceful. Yes, and take a remote maintenance of document management of some small entrepreneurs. No one forbade her. Secretly, of course. The main thing was that the numbers were happy again. Soon Nayli turned into Nayli Smith. She was respected by her colleagues for her acumen, experience, and impeccable professionalism. She was also feared by the students, where Nina Ivanovna taught economics and other specialized disciplines. having quickly received a correspondence pedagogical education. Figures pleased, led her through life, and never once failed. Only in one thing the figures did not help. Nina Ivanovna had no personal life by the age of 60. True, there was a joyous son, Matthew. The woman met his father while she was working for the brothers. It was a visitor from the village, a handsome guy, with a rich imagination, who misled her. A pretty accountant. When Nelly suspected that he was interested in her apartment, specifically the propiska in it, she noisily kicked the suitor out and found out she was pregnant the same week. From a small age Matthew she brought up disciplined, collected, and responsible. The boy at the age of 4 could fry eggs, never cried or complained. He graduated from school with a silver medal. Nelly dreamed that her son received a higher education, and therefore saved money for it almost from his first grade. And when he passed on the budget, and even at the law school, the woman could not rejoice. Money in one piece, and her son will be a lawyer, as she wanted. Since Matthew's birth, Nelly has never had another serious relationship. She'd had affairs, of course, but it was always numbers that interfered. The beau didn't earn enough. What kind of a man was he who earned less than she did? It's a shame to go out in public with such a man. He wasn't tall enough, or too old, or too young. And constantly it seemed to Nelly that all the gentlemen are trying to steal her living space, gained even if not quite honest, but painstaking labor. In the big city, there are many who want to settle down without much worry at someone else's expense. Nelly was determined not to be that expense. All she cared about were the numbers, the welfare of herself and her son. That evening, Nelly waited for her son to come to dinner somehow nervously. First she broke a cup, then she scattered salt on the table. The woman was not a superstitious woman, but the resulting mess irritated her. Matthew had shown up at 9 o'clock, cheerful and overjoyed, a vivid expression of emotion he didn't often display. And Nelly didn't welcome such extravaganzas from experience. She knew they usually had 3 reasons, and they were rarely good ones in love, drunk, or an idea that required money. The first had been settled long ago. Matthew was indifferent to that. He wasn't partial to the second one either, so. Well, tell me what you've already thought up, Nelly asked, looking at her offspring from head to toe through her thin glasses. What have you thought of, Mom? Matthew tried to hide his enthusiasm, but it didn't work very well. He was literally bursting with bright colors. I can't see it, the woman shook her head. Matthew hesitated and sat down on a stool at the table. He knew that, as usual, his mother rejected all his ideas. She thought she knew what was best for her son. No, Matthew was grateful for her sensitivity, but he had never tried to follow her instructions completely. When she forbade him to get a dog as a child, the enterprising Matthew disappeared to the house of his friend Andrew. He did not like his German shepherd Palma, and with the dog Matthew quickly got used to it, even walked with it, gladly replacing the lazy companion. After such walks of her son, Nelly wrinkled her nose, not understanding why suddenly the apartment smelled of dog. In high school, Matthew dreamed of playing the guitar, but Nelly said that the guitar was the domain of idlers. Look at Vysotsky. How much did he accomplish? Mother was wringing her hands in front of her son. But Vysotsky is a legendary man, 16-year-old Matthew parried. A good legend, a circus performer. Nelly spent her life in theaters with her guitar and eventually died at 42. You know why? You should lead a normal life, a serious life. Think about your future promising profession and not play the guitar. Matthew realized that it was useless to argue. His mother's stubbornness was strong. It was a blessing that she worked a lot and was interested only in her son's grades, regimen, and nutrition. Otherwise, Matthew was exempted from the need to report. If they didn't ask, they could. He got an old guitar, found new strings in the morning before dawn, and asked the music teacher to help him with tuning the instrument. In a couple of days, Matthew had a good guitar, though shabby, but it sounded perfect. He played it on camping trips with his class, at first-grade matinees at school, and in Andrew's father's garage. Open fingers he honed in cold water at night. After a few years, however, the love of strings in the guy waned, and the guitar stayed at Andrew's buddy in the garage finally. "Mom, you've been saving money for my education, and I'm studying on a budget," Matthew started from afar. Let's say Nayli raised her right eyebrow. She wasn't wrong again. "I was thinking that I could get a part-time job in the evenings after school. It's about time. I'm 22 soon." Matthew knew just how to placate his mother before revealing his part-time plans. "Who's stopping you?" Nayli agreed, not yet understanding the connection in her son's words. "Well, I got my license in high school, but I haven't had much practice. I have a license. I have free money. I need a car. I'll go to a cab, earn money, and gain experience. You'll always need a car." Matthew exhaled. "A car." Then Nayli muttered. Matthew waited breathlessly, like a pigeon, waiting for a handful of grain from its master. Nayli was figuring out what the car gave and what it would require. A vehicle of one's own was a convenience. Meanwhile, age was making itself felt with sore knees, blood pressure, and an increasing need to get around. The money spent on the car will not hit the family budget because it was put aside long ago. But the question of earning money, but let her son earn a penny, but really learn to drive, will become more responsible, as she wanted. The main thing is not to neglect his studies. The figures add up. A car is a necessary thing, unlike a guitar, Nayli said more warmly. Matthew opened his mouth. He was already making backup plans, how to persuade his friend to hide the car at his place, how to deal with the evening absence. And now this was a gift. "Do you mind?" he asked with a smile he couldn't quite contain. "I'm not euphoric, but I support it," Nayli replied graciously. "Just be careful what you buy. Don't get a thank you." He hugged his mother, and happy, jumped into the room. Of course, the boy had lied a little. Yes, he did want a part-time job in a taxi cab, but even more than that. Matthew wanted freedom from his mother's control. A car offered that opportunity, even if only partially. He could have bought it on the sly. But that wasn't the way the budding lawyer's mind worked. Matthew realized that he needed to prepare the ground and get his mother's official permission to buy it. Then it would be difficult for her to accuse him of anything. And if you periodically bring in the money you earn, Matthew thinks, you'll get approval and you can relax. A week later, Matthew got a foreign car, though not a new one, but not a bad one. Dan, Andrew's father, personally helped him choose it, and a car mechanic can't go wrong. Andrew persuaded Matthew to celebrate the purchase on the first night, but he refused. Instead, he drove around the neighborhood, at first cautiously, getting used to the character of his new friend, and then boldly drove into the city. The car behaved perfectly. In the morning, Matthew drove his mother to work and then ran to his classes, and in the evening he drove around the streets, picking up passengers. Nayli was at first distrustful of the car, but quickly realized how much relief this means of transportation would bring her. Soon the woman got used to it, and even periodically asked her son if he had refueled the car after work and if it needed washing. Matthew chuckled in secret, but did not show it. He had another reason for buying the car, but no one knew about it. At 15, like any teenager, Matthew's hormones were running wild. He became interested in girls. No, the affable and agile boy had never had any trouble making friends with them. Now he was attracted to his former girlfriends in a different way. He wanted to talk to them, to do nice things for them, not just run around the yard. That's how Matthew got his first girlfriend from the parallel class. But when Nayli found out about it, she made a huge scandal. A cat in a bag. Ask a knowledgeable person for help. And don't try to skip classes and fail your diploma. "Mom, I know," Matthew reassured her. "Thank you." He hugged his mother and jumped into the room happy. Of course, the boy had lied a little. Yes, he really did want a part-time job in the cab business. But even more than that, Matthew wanted freedom from his mother's control. A car offered that opportunity, even if only partially. He could have bought it on the sly, but that wasn't the way the budding lawyer's mind worked. Matthew realized that he needed to prepare the ground and get his mother's official permission to buy it. Then it would be difficult for her to accuse him of anything. And if you periodically bring in the money you earn, Matthew thinks you'll get approval and you can relax. A week later, Matthew got a foreign car, though not a new one, but not a bad one. Dan, Andrew's father, personally helped him choose it, and a car mechanic can't go wrong. Andrew persuaded Matthew to celebrate the purchase on the first night, but he refused. Instead, he drove around the neighborhood, at first cautiously, getting used to the character of his new friend, and then boldly drove into the city. The car behaved perfectly. In the morning, Matthew drove his mother to work and then ran to his classes, and in the evening he drove around the streets, picking up passengers. Nayli was at first distrustful of the car, but quickly realized how much relief this means of transportation would bring her. Soon the woman got used to it, and even periodically asked her son if he had refueled the car after work and if it needed washing. Matthew chuckled in secret, but did not show it. He had another reason for buying the car, but no one knew about it. At 15, like any teenager, Matthew's hormones were running wild. He became interested in girls. No, the affable and agile boy had never had any trouble making friends with them. Now he was attracted to his former girlfriends in a different way. He wanted to talk to them, to do nice things for them, not just run around the yard. That's how Matthew got his first girlfriend from the parallel class. But when Nayli found out about it, she made a huge scandal. Matthew stood in front of his mother, almost crying, and she lectured him that studying was more important than relationships with girls. The boy wanted to spite his mother by continuing to date the girl of his choice. But Nayli did her best. She found the phone number of the girl's parents and strictly informed them that their daughter was distracting Matthew from his studies. The unyielding tone of the chief accountant put all the dots on I. Matthew had been shunned by a former friend at school. Nayli thought she was doing the right thing, because her own life had never been about the joys of love, only problems and nerves. Why waste precious time on such nonsense? First you have to achieve something, make a reputation, learn, and then look for a suitable couple. And only one that would suit her, Nayli, completely. And some empty-headed girl to stop her Matthew from moving forward. No. Matthew quietly hated his mother's position, but there wasn't much he could do about it. He realized it was useless to argue with her. He had to maintain a secret private life. However, whether it was his aura or Nayli's invisible hand of protection that stretched far away, every new girl did not stay with him for long. At the institute, a quiet horror began around Matthew. Everyone knew where his mother worked, and among graduate students and faculty, gossip spread at the speed of light. And every new girlfriend of her son, the overbearing accountant and part-time faculty member, crucified her classes as best she could. And if she couldn't do it herself, she asked her colleagues to do it for a small favor. One student, Nayli, and her comrades were so driven to such an extent that the poor girl transferred to another university. Matthew eventually realized that if you look for a friend, then outside the institute, where you can hide her from her mother as much as possible. Nothing good came out of this idea. His mother could detect the girl's presence near him by the smell of perfume. She called him if he was late after class. Matthew couldn't get out much, as Nayli encouraged only academic zeal or rare friendships. The shadow of his mother, always invisibly standing behind the young lawyer's back, frightened the girls, and they quickly severed relations with him. Of course, no one wanted to have such a principled and intrusive mother-in-law. Tiana stood in front of the restaurant manager, her tear-red eyes drooping to the floor. For the third time this week, Gavin was sternly reprimanding the waitress just around the corner from the kitchen. "Third time this week you've gotten on my nerves and made me look like an idiot in front of my guests," he said. "But I didn't mean to." I was pushed. The girl tried to justify herself. We all don't want something. Tiana, you didn't want to break glasses on Monday? You didn't want to forget the dirty rag on the hall table on Wednesday? Didn't want to spill wine on our regular guest today? The manager folded his arms and lowered his voice, instilling a faint hope in Tiana's heart. I'll be more careful, honestly, I promise. Gavin sighed irritably. Promise your mom you'll be back by 11 p.m., and I'll have to fire you. Employees like you are a loss and a disgrace to the establishment. You'll take the money you earned today as a paycheck for your shift and get out of here. Tiana opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. Her eyes stung even more. The manager left. The girl worked a few more hours, despite the dislike of the restaurant's customers. She changed her clothes, stuffed a few bills into the pocket of her cloak, and slipped out of the service exit in a shadow. Only on the street did Tiana allow herself to cry. She had been used to the fact that nothing in life was easy since she was a little girl. Tiana had lost her parents early and knew how hard it was to earn a penny for bread. When she was 7, her family and little brother died in a fire. Nothing was left of the household. The frightened little girl was taken in by an elderly neighbor, Aunt Lexi. She raised the girl, gave her everything she could. But Aunt Lexi could not do much to feed, to drink, to love, and only that. The neighbor's modest money was not enough for beautiful clothes, toys, or sweets. People in the village do not live poorly at all. Tiana helped her mother as much as she could. She took care of the garden and a small farm with 12 chickens while she was at school. From a small age, Tiana knew how to do everything around the house, cooking and baking. After school, she stayed with Aunt Lexi, even though she insisted on sending her to get an education. How could I leave you? Aunt Tiana was carefully smoothing the corner of the pillowcase with an old iron. Come on, Tiana. Aunt Lexi sat in the chair next to her. I'm not going anywhere. And you need to get on with your life. You're not going to be cleaning up after me forever. We had this conversation many times. Auntie was cheerful, but Tiana could see that she was finding it harder and harder to do her usual housework every month. In the end, the girl insisted that her aunt go to the city and be examined. The doctors prescribed heart medication and monthly routine checkups. Seeing the prices at the pharmacy, Tiana just splashed her hands. And then she realized that she had to leave after all to move to the city and work so that her aunt could be treated. Without education, it was hard for a girl to find a job, and she had to live somewhere else. On weekends, she took the train to the village to visit her Aunt Lexi. Tiana rented a tiny dorm room on the edge of town and got a job as a cleaner in a shopping center. Things went well at first, but one day she tripped and a bucket of water spilled out. As a result, one of the stores was left without lights and customers for 2 days. Tiana was fired without pay. The girl did not grieve long and decided to try to work as a nanny in a recruitment agency. They looked squeamishly at her manicure-less hands, dirty from working in the vegetable garden and scrubbing floors, and said, "We've looked at your nails and we're asking you to leave." Tiana sighed, but these very dirty by the standards of city ladies' hands did not put down. She started handing out leaflets and newspapers. True, the income from such work was quite modest. Once in those very newspapers, she saw an ad that the restaurant requires an assistant waiter, dishwasher. She was accepted without much questioning, was given gloves, a sponge, and told to start work the same day. For 2 months, the girl worked hard, washed and rubbed glasses, washed plates and pans to a shine. One day in the restaurant, a waitress did not come out. The manager burst into the kitchen, took a quick look at Tiana, told her to change, put on an apron, and go out into the hall to serve the guests. The first few days were hard, but the girl took to the task diligently. She quickly mastered the simple craft of waitressing. "You're fast," Gavin once told her. "It would be easier for me to hire a granny at the car wash than to look for an adequate employee in the hall." Things were going well at first, with customers leaving good tips. Tiana bought herself some decent clothes, sent more money to the village, some guests, and a supply of medicine for her aunt. And then the black streak began. Then that rag absent-mindedly forgotten in a hurry on one of the tables. Then broken dishes. And now a guest poured wine on the table, and finally Tiana was fired. The girl walked down the night street, wiping her tears. The most frustrating thing was that she had already thought that everything was getting better, spent all the money and did not pay for the room on time. And the owners were waiting for payment and were already looking askew at the young tenant. When Tiana got home, she found another surprise. Her belongings had been piled carelessly into a gym bag and put out into the hallway with an obvious hint. There was no more strength to cry. The paycheck for one shift wouldn't be enough to pay for a month in advance. Tiana didn't grovel after being evicted in absentia. The girl grabbed her bag by the handles, unhooked her keys from the keychain, placed them on the bollard next to her, and left. The penetrating October wind blew in her face. She would walk to the train station, and there she would take the first train in the morning to her aunt's village. Cry quietly into her pillow at night, and try again. Each time, though, it was harder and harder, but the health of her family man was more precious to Tiana. Matthew was in a great mood. He had done a good job today. Outside the window, the streetlights, the bright signs, the neon lights of the city in the rain seemed to flow with color. It was even brighter. At night, from the beginning of the shift, the work went as smoothly as possible. There were expensive orders and interesting passengers. Until 6, Matthew discussed with a philosophy professor, laughed with animators in costumes, drove 2 elderly girlfriends to the theater. The guy liked to drive around the city. He felt free and relaxed. Of course, there were some silent passengers, but for some reason they were a minority. The atmosphere in the car apparently disposed even the hardened silent ones to talk. By midnight, the downpour had intensified. Matthew dropped off the last passenger at the edge of town near the private sector and decided that it was time to call it a day. He made a leisurely stop at a gas station, picked up a coffee and a sandwich, tipped the gas station attendant, and headed home in a melancholy mood. There were hardly any people on the streets at this late hour, so Matthew was surprised to see a girl walking along the curb. She was soaked through. She was carrying a heavy sports bag in her hands, and her cloak was useless. "Young lady, what are you doing?" "Get in. I'll give you a ride home." The guy stopped and opened the door from the passenger side. "And I have nowhere to go." He heard a completely broken voice. "I don't have a home here, but let me take you somewhere." "The weather's terrible," Matthew insisted. "It's free." He suddenly felt surprisingly sorry for the girl. Not because she was walking alone at night in a downpour, but because Matthew felt a silent call for help. The kind of call you might read in the eyes of a puppy abandoned in a box. "Sit down, please." "I can't leave you here at a time like this." Matthew emphasized the word please very strongly. The stranger, he thought, sighed. Then she skipped over a puddle by the curb and grabbed the door handle. They drove in silence for a while. Matthew turned on the heater to warm the shivering passenger. "How did you end up here?" The boy was the first to ask, and Tiana told him. It was as if she had been saving it all up for months, and now she was out of control. She talked, and Matthew listened until he realized she was crying. "You'll forgive me for sitting here crying like this. It's a terrible shame for you." A stranger, she apologized confusedly as the car stopped at a stoplight. Instead of answering, Matthew pulled some tissues out of the glove compartment. "But why a stranger?" "My name is Matthew." He held out a paper handkerchief to the girl with a smile. "Tanya," she sobbed in response. "Well, now we know each other. Would you like some coffee or tea?" Tanya had no time to answer, as he stopped at another gas station and disappeared in the doorway. 5 minutes later, he handed the girl a hot cup, a small chocolate bar, and threw his jacket from the back seat over her shoulders. They pulled off to the pad to the side. Matthew tried to lighten the mood as best he could, even trying some awkward jokes. This girl's story seemed to him like a mockery of fate, and at the same time he felt a desire to help. It was strange. Matthew wouldn't call himself sentimental or tearful. He didn't give money to beggars, and he wasn't Benjamin. And now I have nowhere to go. I can hardly afford a hotel. I don't know much about the city. Tanya finished her story, warming her fingers on a hot drink. Please bring me to the station. If you don't mind, I'll wait for the train there. You'll freeze at the station in your wet clothes. Stay at my place, and tomorrow I'll take you to the station, Matthew said. The words came out of his mouth before he could think about it. He didn't think about his mother or morality at that moment. He wanted from the bottom of his heart to do something good for his accidental passenger. Tanya froze and for the first time truly stared at Matthew in amazement. He nodded silently, with a slight smile, confirming his offer. And Tanya suddenly agreed. Tired, wet, exhausted, she figured she simply had nothing to lose, and so be it. That late evening, Matthew spoke to his mother in a way he had never spoken to her before. Nellie, of course, was against the idea of her apartment acting as a lodging house for unemployed women. However, for the first time, her son did not ingratiate himself to her or ask for permission, but spoke in a voice as firm as a rock. Nellie felt a chill run down her spine. So different from the Matthew she was used to. She'll clean herself up, and I'll see her off tomorrow morning, he said. Don't embarrass yourself, Mom. If you can't kick the poor girl out, you'll only embarrass yourself in front of her and the neighbors. Matthew firmly contradicted his mother once more and went downstairs to the car to fetch Tiana. Nellie was quietly seething, but for some reason she couldn't object. Had something about him changed that evening? Something that made the woman, against her will, look at her son differently. The university's chief accountant defiantly closed herself in her bedroom and turned off the lights. Matthew put Tiana in his room and moved to the sofa in the living room. The girl's wet clothes were hung on the backs of chairs and radiators. Good night to you, Tiana, he said as he closed the door. Good night to you too. Thank you, the girl replied, lay back on her pillow, closed her eyes, and for the first time in many days truly smiled. Matthew stood outside the door, wondering what had happened to him today. Was it an attack of pity, compassion, an outburst of emotion, or had his soul reached out to someone unfamiliar but dear, someone in need of protection and care? Early in the morning, Nellie got ready for work. She was offended by her son's behavior. To prove it, she had gotten up at the crack of dawn and decided to go to the university herself, though she was used to Matthew driving her. But principle and resentment were dearer. Nellie examined her guest's old-fashioned coat on the rack by the bathroom, then glanced even more squeamishly at the stale, dirty sneakers. Things in the hallway hinted that she was not noted for her tidiness, her limited means. The woman stepped over the stranger's shoes, deciding to wash the hallway with bleach upon her return, and left. The young men awoke almost simultaneously. Matthew saw through the doorway as Tiana timidly tried to find the bathroom. It was not without some awkwardness. Matthew, like a hospitable host, had even made breakfast. But it was made of sandwiches and tea early in the morning, when he himself dropped the unpretentious dishes. The sandwich landed sausage side down and landed on Tiana's pant leg with a piece of butter. The young people stared at the sad piece of salami on the plate for a few seconds, and then laughed. Matthew felt so relaxed and at the same time at ease with this girl that he hadn't even noticed his mother's absence from the morning. Of course, any awkwardness was gone from the conversation. "Are you on your way to the station?" he asked. They chatted like old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Tiana had forgotten all about what had happened to her yesterday. It was sunny, just like this sunny city. She told her sudden companion about her childhood at her aunt's house, about how she liked to pick dandelion bouquets in the vegetable garden, about the time she was pecked by a rooster, about her first of her dictation. There was no sadness or longing in these stories, only carefree childhood and sincere delight of a child. Matthew listened eagerly, attentive to every word, absorbing these pure emotions, which he almost never got from his mother. With her commanding temperament, she was always dry, not praising, not encouraging, not interested in her son's dreams and discoveries. Nayli was preoccupied with the primary worldly tasks: food, regimen, studies, profession, finances. Matthew had enough friends. Teachers at school loved him. Girls were not shy to make eyes at him. But all this was a trifle compared to what this 19-year-old girl from the village told him today. With simplicity, purity, and trust. They waited for the train together, sitting on the platform. "Thank you very much." "I don't know how to thank you," Tiana said again with some awkwardness as she said goodbye. "It's okay," Matthew dismissed her. "But I do. Let's meet again when you get back and go to the movies." Tiana was a girl from the countryside who had come to the city. She met Matthew and a warm friendship developed between them. Matthew was charmed by Tiana's openness, spontaneity, and cheerfulness, something he lacked in his relationship with his own strict mother, Nayli. When Tiana was leaving, Matthew suggested that they meet again when she came to town and go to a movie. Tiana was happy at the prospect. Upon returning home, Matthew faced the displeasure of Nayli's mother, who considered Tiana a country wench and tried to get rid of any trace of her in the apartment with bleach. A conflict arose, during which Matthew for the first time openly confronted his mother, tired of her excessive control over his life. This situation highlighted the overdue contradictions between Matthew and his mother, Nayli. On the one hand, Nayli cared for her son, but at the same time she was overprotective and tried to impose her rigid attitudes on him. And Matthew, having met Tiana, felt a longing for freedom, lightness, and spontaneity in relationships. This story touches on the themes of growing up, gaining independence, the value of simple human joys, and the ability to assert one's boundaries even in relationships with loved ones. The clash of two life philosophies caused a generational conflict between mother and son. "I'm sick of your control," said Nayeli. "I see you've picked up a lot of chutzpah from that hillbilly too." "Better chutzpah than a lifetime of being told what to do by someone else," Matthew said, and slammed the front door so hard that the figurines fell from the table. He slept in the car that night. Such loud arguments with his mother had never happened before. The boy had always held back or avoided sharp edges with cunning. But now something had been hurt that didn't want to put up with the insults. Tiana didn't tell her aunt what had happened. She said she was just visiting for a few days. The perceptive relative immediately noticed that her stepdaughter was unusually joyful. "But Tiana, tell me, did you meet someone?" Aunt Lexi asked at dinner. The girl burst out in surprise and dropped her spoon into her plate, splashing the table. Aunt Lexi laughed. "Ouch. You don't have to answer that. I can already see that I've met a handsome man." Tiana told her named mother about Matthew. "The main thing is that the man is good. You don't see much selfless help these days." Aunt Lexi patted her stepdaughter's shoulder approvingly. "Auntie, I don't think I'm right for him," Tiana said. "And anyway, maybe that's true. I was already dreaming of a house with a rose garden. And if you don't dream, then why live?" The woman was genuinely surprised. "You should have fallen in love a long time ago. In my childhood, there was only school, vegetable garden, chickens. I'm old, you'll be sitting on my neck." "But Auntie, don't say that," Tiana objected. "Who else but me will help you? Youth is for dreaming, for joy, for falling in love. And you are doing a great deal for me. Go and meet him, and I'll give you something to dress up." Aunt Lexi got up and went into her room. From there she heard the noise and creaking of an old closet. Soon the woman returned with 2 stud earrings. This is what my late husband Alex gave me from my wedding in 1973. Ural emerald, a good luck stone. She placed the jewelry in the palm of the amazed Tiana's hand. The earrings were small, but elegant, even noble. The light green stone played in the sun, shimmering with facets. Aunt Lexi easily pushed Tiana to the mirror to try on the gift, and it was as if the jewelry was made for the girl. The emerald earrings looked even more beautiful against her brown hair. Well, what's not a bride-to-be? Well done, Aunt Lexi said with a pat on the knee. Tiana laughed and took another sneak peek at herself in the reflection. That same night, Matthew called her himself. They chatted about everything and nothing. For about half an hour, the guy said he'd meet her at the train station. Also that he had a surprise. Tiana exhaled, awkwardly said goodbye, and went to bed, gazing dreamily at the fishnet shadows on the ceiling. Matthew did apologize to Nayli's mother for being rude when he cooled down. Still, the heated atmosphere in the apartment was hitting a nerve. It was amazing how Matthew had been practicing law at the university, operating with articles and laws, arguing with his professors, but he had been unable to defend his opinion to his mother until that day, because she had built her unquestionable rightness and authority into his head. Nayli listened to her son's apology and pretended to accept it too. But the coolness of the relationship betrayed the truth. Perhaps she was a little more critical of her son than usual, as if she were getting back at him for the offense. And he seemed impenetrably indifferent. About his studies, about cars, about passengers at work. Fears and worries. The invisible grit, he shook off his shirt and adjusted the collar of his coat. A worm of worry coiled inside Nayli. Had something changed? Whereas before she could confidently say she knew her Matthew from the get-go, now she couldn't. He was with her, and not with her at the same time. She'd been tempted to ask her son about her concerns several times, but she didn't know how to begin. The control she'd built her life around had been broken. The day of their second meeting was unusually warm for October. The sun was so hot that Tiana had taken off her cloak and was carrying it in her hands. Matthew even wore dark sunglasses, though he hid his eyes, which kept looking at the girl, her hair, her figure, her eyes, the polka dots on her blouse, the neat earrings. Every detail Matthew wanted to memorize and keep. In 3 days he'd missed her so much it felt like they hadn't seen each other in forever. "So what's the surprise?" Tiana asked, tucking an embarrassed strand behind her ear. Matthew nodded enigmatically and took her hand, calmly and confidently at the same time. In that gesture, all the worry, fuss, and concern dissolved. They walked down a long alley littered with yellow maple leaves and found themselves in a pet store. "Do you want to get me a hamster?" Tiana laughed. Matthew only smiled again. "Look here for a moment," he said, and disappeared behind the racks of aquariums. Tiana looked at the strange fish, the funny guinea pigs, and the noisy parrots. She liked the atmosphere, and she had always loved animals. She used to feed the chickens from her hands as a little girl, stroking their feathers, but they only clucked and looked into her face with their bird eyes. Tiana was distracted from her thoughts when through the bars she was playing with a parrot, as green as a young pea. "I see you've already got the hang of it. You've got the hang of it," joked a small woman in an apron with the store's emblem. "Hello, Tiana. My name is Olivia. Can it be Olivia? Matthew told me you were looking for a job." "Aunt Olivia is my best friend Alex's mom," Matthew explained. "And she'd love to have you if you'd like to work for her, of course." Tiana couldn't believe her ears with joy. Yes, I agree. I'm ready to start today," she blurted out. Olivia laughed. "That's the spirit. But today is not necessary. In 2 or 3 days, find a place to live, and then call me." She handed Tiana her business card, confused and happy at the same time. Matthew had a few words with the friendly pet store owner, and they walked out. "This is the second time you've helped me?" "I already feel very uncomfortable about it," Tiana said. The girl looked at Matthew, I didn't do anything, she said, jokingly raising her hands. A car brought you home to me, and Aunt Oberon took you to work. Of course she did, Tiana laughed and poked Matthew in the side with a finger of poorly hidden pride. Matthew whooped and laughed and immediately started tickling Tiana in return. They ran down the street like fools, one after another, giggling like schoolboys. Passers-by turned to look at the strange couple. But for them, the world gradually shrank to just each other. Would you point your finger at me again if I said I'd help you a third time? Matthew asked when they were out of breath. Tiana opened her mouth but said nothing. Let's go somewhere, Matthew suggested. And then we can go to the movies. I think we can make it in time. He looked at his wristwatch. 15 minutes later, the boys pulled up in front of the university dormitory. Matthew was friends with the head of the group, and he got along with the commandant. A small gift, a thank you envelope, a story about a poor relative, and he agreed to let the pseudo-student stay for a month or two. All the more so because Tiana's age was more than suitable. However, the commandant asked her to keep out of sight of the teachers and to come before 22. Are you a wizard, honestly? Tiana stared at Matthew as they walked outside with the room key. The boy scrutinized his chin and the back of his head, and then stated with a very serious look. So no beard, like Hotabak. The magic hat is also missing. Verdict? No, I'm not a wizard. Matthew leaned over to Tiana and whispered conspiratorially. Well, maybe a little. He made her laugh playfully and cleverly solved in one-day problems that took her weeks to solve. It was beginning to seem to her that the fairy tales her aunt had told her as a child were coming true. Let's hurry, Matthew took her hand again, firm and gentle at the same time. We have a movie starting in 20 minutes. It was one of the most joyous days of Matthew's life in recent memory. Yes, he'd skipped class today. Yes, he wouldn't go to work tonight. Yes, his mother would freak out if she found out. But why? Right now he feels needed and happy. And happiness is definitely worth a couple unattended lectures and a few missed passengers. Nayli tapped her pencil nervously on her desk. She had given the students an assignment. They sat like mice and wrote, while the instructor was lost in her own thoughts. 15 minutes ago, the department told her that Matthew had skipped class. He hadn't been in class before or after lunch. The helpful group supervisor had even asked Nayli if her son was all right. The woman threw something discreet in response, but inside her a mixture of resentment, frustration, and intense misunderstanding was slowly simmering. Matthew didn't pick up his phone and turned it off altogether. When had she not seen him treat her like that? So what if he became an adult? A mother should be respected at any age. She wants what's best for him to have a future, to become a powerful man, to make a name and a career. Where did it all start? Well, I guess it started with the unfortunate car. Yeah, that was a mistake. She let him, it was her own fault, believing a young man's good intentions. And now she's looking for him in that car. He's out of control. He feels he can do anything. So we've got to get rid of her as soon as possible. And Matthew can go back to being a good student and a good son. And if he wants to work, he can be a paralegal. You can't trust a man, even if it is your own child. She knows what's best. She's lived her life and managed to settle down well only because of her savvy, calculating, and pragmatic nature. So she can beat the crap out of a young guy's head. He'll thank her later, when his classmates are trampling the training ground in their boots. It's Daddy's bad blood. Nayli remembered her father. He, too, had been doing things during their short relationship. At first she'd even liked it, but then it became clear that without organization and discipline, nothing good would come of it. And a little later the beau made it clear what he really wanted. He was noodling about eternal love, encouraging Nayli to register him at her place. She couldn't let Matthew, whom she'd raised all her life, suddenly turn off the well-thought-out path. The weeds of excessive freedom, dubious girlfriends, and the like must be pulled out at the root. The chief accountant was distracted from his thoughts by a call from the class. The students hurriedly began to hand in their papers. Nellie didn't even glance at the stack of papers that piled up in the corner of her desk a couple minutes later. In her mind, she was already creating a plan to save her son and get him back on track. Matthew had come home in a light, uplifted mood, and that made the air sparkle. Nellie's mood was diametrically opposed. "Matthew, is there anything you want to tell me?" she asked, as soon as his son entered the kitchen and began to pour his tea. "No, Mom. Nothing yet." He smiled radiantly at his mother from the other end of the kitchen. "So skipping class isn't enough reason to talk?" Nellie tried to hold back the outrage that was bursting out of her. Matthew's hand hovered in the air, a teaspoonful of sugar. He exhaled, then carefully poured the sugar into the cup and stirred the contents leisurely. "Mom, I'm a grown man. If there are tails on my studies from my absence, I'll deal with them myself. Don't be so nervous." Nellie's calm, measured tone made her son's voice boil even more. "Why are you embarrassing me? Do you want people to point the finger at me for having a truant son?" "No, Mom, you want to make a big deal out of nothing. One day of absenteeism is not the disaster you pictured." Matthew still spoke firmly and calmly, though it cost him some effort. For some reason, after talking to Jenny, he felt more mature, stronger, more confident. The weight that had been weighing on his shoulders since childhood and preventing him from objecting to his parent had dissolved into oblivion. With absenteeism, everything begins. Then women, then stupid adventures. Before you know it, you'll be without a diploma, without a profession, and without a decent place in life, Nellie said. "Mom, stop making such a big deal out of it, please." Matthew sighed tiredly and rubbed his temples. The lightness and the wonderful impression of the day were gone because of this inane interrogation. Nellie, like a horse that had been yanked backwards at the most crucial moment, felt the invisible thread of her control over her son fleeing further and further ahead. "Tell me, why did you skip your classes?" the woman asked. "I went to get my car repaired," Matthew replied. He realized that the truth would make his mother even more furious, so he said the first thing that came into his head. "You think I can't see you're lying?" Nellie threw the towel over her shoulder and put her hands to her sides. "What car?" "I'm old, Matthew, but I'm not crazy." "I've been fixing the car," the guy said expressively, separating his words with pauses. "Give me the keys," Nellie demanded. "I bought this car for you, and I'll take it back." What happened next broke some shudder in the woman's mind. Matthew silently pulled a bundle from his pocket, unhooked the alarm keys from it, and placed them in his mother's palm. Nellie stared at them stupidly somehow. The emotional army looked out from behind them confusedly, not realizing where the enemy had gone. "Take it. Only you can't drive." That's one thing. Matthew began to curl his fingers defiantly. "You can't sell it without the owner's signature. Me, that's two. In the end, your money, as you say, will rot in the yard, or will become the prey of car thieves when they find a car without an owner for several months. That's three." Nellie stared at him in amazement, gulping for air. Matthew calmly took the keys. Then he came very close and said quietly but seriously, "Don't forget who I'm studying for, even if I occasionally skip classes." The guy took a mug of tea from the table and left the kitchen. The incident was over. The first stage of Nellie's plan had collapsed like a house of cards. She didn't like the job. For the first few weeks, she'd come to it as if it were an out-of-the-way place. Oberon marveled at how quickly the girl grasped everything and even did more on instinct. But the village childhood and her experience in caring for animals had its effect. Tiana quickly realized that she loved these hamsters, and what treats can only be given to parrots. In one day, she sorted through a warehouse of pet food. Then she cleaned 2 old aquariums to a shine which were dusty in the back room. "Well done," praised her store owner. "You can buy new fish if there is room." Tiana was not tired in the slightest. The work did not exhaust her as before. In the evening she came to the dormitory, read books, or looked for information about her furry feathered charges on the net. She didn't want to collapse on the bed and fall asleep. This peculiar training has borne fruit. The customers listened to the girl enthusiastically. When they faced the choice of buying a pet, Tiana sat little mice in the arms of children, showed how to properly catch fish with a net from the aquarium, explained how to teach parrots to talk. Oberon could not be pleased with such a smart and diligent worker. Tiana herself was quietly pleased. She was afraid to rejoice loudly. Everything was going too well in her life. She was used to breaking through, climbing, gnawing her teeth with tears in her eyes. And her aunt said that there were plenty of envious eyes around, and they were not even necessarily acquaintances. That's how you rejoice. And some offended by life lady on the street spit and wishes you nasty things. So it is better to be quiet, but be sure that happiness will not go anywhere. The girl told me how she had settled down. She unobtrusively asked about Matthew, but Tiana did not refuse. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week. Matthew would stop by her place of work before his shift in a cab. They would sit in the corner of the store like a pair of canaries. Oberon had once scolded Matthew for interfering with Tiana's work, but then waved it off, seeing the boys' glances at each other. Tiana hated to let him go every time, but she was afraid to say so. The range of emotions around Matthew was off the charts. She felt like a fool when he explained some historical facts with an important look. Then she was embarrassed and blushed. If he brought her goodies and small nice gifts, she sank in his eyes as in a cup of fragrant tea. Once he waited for her after the store closed. They drove around town all evening, and then Matthew handed her a neat bouquet. Never had any man treated her so simply and tenderly at the same time, not counting her aunt. But here was different. There was care, a twinge of shyness, a fear of offending, a desire to protect and shelter her under his wing. Tiana could feel it all without words. She'd once tried to start a conversation about thanking him for helping her with her job and housing. But Matthew put his finger to his lips and smiled. She was drawn to him more and more each day. When Tiana went to the village, she missed him especially. She wanted to put her arms around him, snuggle her nose into his chest and be silent. Smiling in love, she finally remembered that you can live and work not only for someone or for the sake of someone, but also just for yourself. Of course, Tiana never stopped sending her aunt money and worrying about her health. But for the first time, she realized that she could exhale and slow down a bit. That there were simple everyday joys, that you didn't have to run ahead, and sometimes you could even let yourself relax. October was over, and rainy, cold November came, followed by December. But not everyone was in the same gloomy mood. In Matthew's mind, the sun was shining all the time, whether he was in classes or driving to work. Time dragged on, but with Tiana, it flew by like a blink. His mother was behind him, or pretended to be. He didn't really care. Matthew didn't respect or love her any less. He just realized it was time to protect his personal space. Funny how it was only meeting the girl from the village that put things in perspective. Before, he had waited anxiously for his parents' approval and worried about her every no, even though he found an alternative. Matthew also realized that his mother would definitely not approve of his affair with Tiana. Not now, anyway. That's why he hid the girl's presence in every possible way. Why create unnecessary conflicts? When the time came, he'd introduce them for real. Toward the end of the year, every accountant is overwhelmed. You have to make reports, summarize all the documents, add up debit and credit. And, as is always the case, some certificates and forms were missing. Nayli had to send a couple of graduate students to lead the way, and herself to search for the necessary papers. She preferred to do everything in advance. There were enough examples around of those who procrastinated until the last-minute, sleepy students turning in their tails, and young professors cursing the university's bureaucratic system, while trying to fill out all the journals in a day before an audit. Why do people have such a lack of respect for numbers? After all, you just have to start and everything in life goes according to plan. Someone will stop being late, someone will find out where most of their money goes, and someone will make an informed decision. Naily thought. On their head, like a perfectionist, everything was in order. Accounting, Alex's student house. Matthew's shelf was empty. Outwardly, everything was the same, and she couldn't charge anything to her son based on maternal suspicion alone. But that same instinct told her that her son had changed. More precisely, he stopped listening to her. Break. All the shelves in the study. Naily realized she had to go to the university dormitory. The necessary documents were bound to be there with the commandant. At first, Naily had thought of sending a young assistant to the dormitory, but then something compelled her to go herself. And, as it turned out, for good reason. As soon as she came around the corner, she saw a familiar car in the parking lot in front of the dormitory. Matthew was standing next to it, reverently embracing a girl in an unremarkable gray jacket, but with a bright green scarf. The head accountant lurked around the corner like a detective. Then she took out her cell phone and snapped a couple of pictures. "So this is the mouse responsible for all my son's changes," the woman whispered, peering at Tiana through the panes of her glasses. At first, Naily wanted to give her offspring a beating right there in the parking lot. But experience told her to be more subtle. She'd already kept more than one skirt away from her boy. It would be easy to deal with a skirt like that. Naily even hid her face from all pictures of her son. It seemed to her the most disgusting prank. The woman waited until the couple had left, and with a determined look, she made her way to the commandant's office. "First, I decided to get all the necessary paperwork, and then to nail the guardian of the peace of the dormitory to the wall with personal questions. I've got a truant student who lives here. I want to talk to her." Naily began from afar as the papers were already in her bag. "Whoever we find will be punished." The commandant, who liked to show off to the faculty on occasion, was keenly interested. True, this did not prevent him from covering student parties and absences for a small payoff. But here's the trouble. I don't remember the name and I've only seen it once, but here's a photo. Help me find this shameless one. Naily shoved her phone under the commandant's nose, where Tiana's face was clearly visible. He turned up his nose predatorily, but then faltered, like a hound mistaking an empty tin can for a partridge. "Not ours exactly," he shrugged. "What do you say? Why don't you send an inspection down here? Have you had an accounting for a long time?" And repairs. Naily raised one eyebrow expressively. "I'm a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience." The commandant's eyes flickered. He was choosing the lesser of evils. Considering that some of the public property was written off, or sold, and the pipes and electrics were kept on duct tape and word of honor, he didn't need any inspections. He had to get the full because of the mess in the dormitory, or to get a little because of the lieutenant. The choice was obvious. "But actually," said the commandant, "she lives in room 302, but it is temporary, at the request of a relative from the village." Only then he realized that the girl in question could not be a student, which meant that she had not been truant. But it was too late. "Apparently the law doesn't apply to you," said Naily. Apparently an audit wouldn't hurt after all. The head accountant adjusted her glasses, turned to the door, and walked out. By evening, Naily knew everything about Tiana: who she was, where she came from, what she was doing in the dormitory, and how she had gotten there. The story of a village girl with no education who was trying desperately to get a foothold in the city had set things straight. The woman realized that she was not wrong in her premonitions. She made a couple of calls and hung up the receiver of the working landline phone on the lever in satisfaction. Matthew looked at the time. It was almost 7 p.m. Tiana would be finishing work in half an hour. The young people agreed to go for a walk. The weather was just right. It was snowing without wind. The city seemed to be covered with a downy shawl. The guy took a couple of cups of coffee, Tiana's favorite chocolate, and went along a familiar route. but going into the store, saw instead of Joy crying girl and consoling her Oberon. "Nothing, Tianushka. I can wait until you get settled again." The kind pet store owner stroked Tiana's back. "What's wrong?" Matthew rushed over to them, not forgetting his coffee, which he nearly spilled. "Everything's gone. They evicted me from the dormitory." Tiana wiped away her tears. "They said only students could live there." "Well, why am I surprised? I'm the one who sat down." Matthew berated himself. "You should have found another place to live a long time ago. Where's the stuff? Is it in the warehouse over there?" Oberon nodded at the door behind the cash register. "It's not your fault," Tiana said. "I'm the one who got too relaxed. Let's go. Let's try to do something." Matthew took the bags from behind the door. "Aunt Abby, if Tiana doesn't work for a couple of days, nothing will happen." "Oh, come on, Matthew." The woman waved her hand. "Well, I'm not human, am I? Of course I'll wait. Besides, you can't throw away such workers." Tiana looked at her employer with grateful eyes, and then at Matthew, who was already holding her jacket. "Come on, Eagles, you've got work to do." Oberon admonished them before they left. The snow was still circling in the air, falling carelessly, dancing. Next to Matthew, Tiana immediately became calmer. He certainly wouldn't let her stay out at night. They got into the car, stowed their bags. "We'll check into a hotel tonight, and tomorrow we'll find you an apartment," he said. "But let's stop by my place. I think I left my car papers in my room. If the police stop me, I don't want to pay a fine." "Sure, let's go." Tiana nodded and unconsciously hugged Matthew's arm. While they reached their destination, they called several hotels and very soon found a free and inexpensive room. They could exhale a little. As the car pulled into the driveway, Tiana's cell phone suddenly rang. She thought that it was the hotel receptionist, so she picked up the phone without looking at the screen. After a couple of minutes, the phone slipped out of her hands and fell on the seat. "What? Who called?" Matthew saw Tiana sit up with a determined face and saw her eyes fill with tears again. "Auntie's been taken to the hospital," Tiana muttered with wooden lips. It was the neighbor who called the ambulance. Matthew pulled her to him and hugged her. "Why is all this coming down on you?" He stroked her hair and felt her shaking with sobs and tears. And Tiana was crying again, only out of helplessness. She had only just begun to believe in miracles as life brought her harshly back to reality. "Matthew, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Calm down. Let's go to your aunt's." "What hospital did they take her to?" Matthew started fumbling in the armrests. "In the meantime, have a drink. Tears won't help, but your eyes will hurt." He took out a plastic bag of pills and a bottle of mineral water. And then what they call a fatal accident happened. Tiana swallowed the pills and began coughing desperately. Matthew, in a panic, rushed to pound the girl's back and search for water around the car. But there was no more. He realized that just a little more, and they would have to go to the hospital for another reason. There was no choice but to go up to the apartment to get a glass of water. Matthew flew into the kitchen without taking off his shoes and immediately met the surprised gaze of Nayli's mother. All she could see was her son rushing back into the hallway with the hair dryer and the glass, and that there was someone coughing desperately. A few seconds later, the eyes of the unofficial mother-in-law and daughter-in-law met, the former's full of contempt, arrogance, and disgust, the latter's frightened and confused. "Why did you bring this here?" Nayli didn't even bother to call Tiana anything other than it. "Mom, can't you see? Is she sick?" Matthew stood up for his friend. "I see." The chief accountant wrinkled her nose squeamishly. "And she wants to get a better job at your expense." Matthew stepped between his mother and Tiana. "You've lost the last vestiges of your humanity with your numbers," he said, putting his back to the girl. "No, son. You've lost your mind." Nayli raised her hand and poked Tiana with her finger. "That girl's just a country girl. She'll move in, get pregnant, saddle you up in our apartment, and make money out of you." Tiana felt dizzy, whether from the fact that she could breathe normally at last or from the words of this scary woman hitting her like a rod. "I'd rather lose my mind with her than go on living with you on a leash," Matthew said, pulling Tiana close to him. Matthew turned his back to his outraged mother and hugged Tiana, who was trembling with shock. And out they went. To the hospital, the young people drove in silence. The girl no longer had the strength for emotions, and the guy was ashamed in front of her. In the hospital, Tiana barely made her way through the nurses to Aunt Ida's room. The woman was unexpectedly cheerful and was discussing something with another patient. "Auntie?" Tiana looked at her with a mixture of joy and bewilderment. The old woman went into the cellar and slipped on the last step. I went tumbling. Aunt Ida began to tell her story so contagiously cheerful that everyone present involuntarily smiled. I was sitting on a pile of potatoes. My leg was curled up. Somehow my neck, the crown, and the soup fell out. I got up somehow. Our neighbor went into the barn. I called out to her. And that's how I ended up here. "Oh, Aunt Ida. Do you know how to scare?" Tiana laughed and hugged the woman. "It's a sprain. They put a plaster cast on me, covered the abrasions with green, but left them." Aunt Ida nodded at the pile of papers on the nightstand next to Tiana's familiar mother. Tiana was immediately relieved. She was happy that everything had worked out. Neither lost housing nor nasty words could be more important than the love of those closest to her. Matthew's head poked into the room. He was tired of tramping down the hall. Come in, young man." Aunt Ida waved her hand invitingly, a little embarrassed. "Your guests. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time." Tiana introduced them to each other. In a couple of minutes, the conversation was already flowing animatedly. It was so easy and relaxed for all three of them, as if they were not in a hospital room, but on the veranda of a country house on a Saturday sunset. They chatted until the nurse asked the visitors to leave, as the time had passed 22. "We'll come tomorrow," Tiana promised. Come. Just the two of you," Aunt Ida winked at them both approvingly. When Matthew didn't come home the first night, Nayli had treated it as a whim. When Matthew didn't show up the second, third night either, Nayli began to worry. And when one day some of his things disappeared, she realized that the usual order had been broken. In the mind of a woman who had spent her life measuring by numbers, what had happened was incomprehensible. The unfortunate broken cup came to mind. On the fourth day, Nayli caught Matthew in the corridor of the university. "When are you coming home?" she asked him sternly but worriedly. "I'm fine," Mom, Matthew replied distantly and coldly. "Don't be nervous." He pulled his elbow out of his mother's palm and headed off to his next class. Matthew and Tiana rented an apartment. A neighbor looked after the household in the village. There, in that tiny room of an old 5-story building, Matthew felt as cozy and good as he had never felt anywhere else. He already knew that this girl would definitely become his wife. Her inner world, her childlike directness, her marvelous sense of beauty charmed him. Her borscht cutlets could compete with restaurant dishes, an affectionate embrace in the evenings energized and relaxed at the same time. Tiana stopped by Aunt Lexi's hospital every day before work. Tiana had a fiancé. Aunt Lexi laughed. "What a fiancé?" Tiana waved away the beet-red Tiana. "I'm old, but I'm not bad." "I see that you both bloom like a flower on a May afternoon," the woman said good-naturedly, patting her stepdaughter on the head. Matthew smiled at the words, for they were true. When Aunt Lexi was discharged, the young men took her to the village. The elderly woman, limping but alert, joked constantly. From that day on, Matthew began going to see her with Tiana almost constantly. He liked the village atmosphere, the peace and tranquility. He had never had any relatives in the countryside, so everything was a wonder. The young man looked at the house and yard with keen interest, zealously brushed the snow, and constantly found something to do that required a man's hand. He changed the faucet, insulated the wiring, rehung the doors on the kitchen cabinets. Walk with the one aunt. Lexi elbowed Tiana while standing in the hallway. Tired of planting potatoes and digging beds in the spring, Tiana said, "I'd love to." Matthew crawled out from under the sink with a wrench, and Tiana laughed. Periodically, the couple's idyll in the village or in the apartment was broken by Nayli's phone calls. She asked Matthew to come back, shouted at him, threatened him, begged him, but the boy was adamant. Yes, it was hard to combine studying, working in a cab, and traveling out of town. On weekends, I had to deny myself something to pay the rent. But it was better than living under orders and constant control. "Mom, I'm fine." "Don't be so nervous," Matthew answered with the usual phrases without appealing to his conscience. Neither entreaties nor even tears could make him become comfortable and proper by his mother's standards again. In the end, Matthew began to be at home, but for a tick, and kept his new address a secret. He never refused help, but he kept his distance and continued to assert his personal boundaries. Nayli's anger was replaced by jealousy powerlessness, and it flowed into resentment. Colleagues said different things, who scolded the village girl, who suggested to get away from his son. But all agreed in one thing: at such a young age, so nervous will not do any good. Several months had passed since mid-April. Spring burst into town with cherry blossoms and the scent of the first daffodils. Nayli, though tired, could not fully accept the fact that her son lived apart. One warm day, when the sun was almost summertime, the accountant, returning from work, sat down on a bench in the lilac bushes. Usually Nayli never sat on it with her neighbors, considering it beneath her dignity to watch passers-by. But today her new shoes rubbed her foot, and she had no choice. Daniel, an elderly neighbor, came out of the entryway, leaning on a stick. He was a quiet old man who lived on the first floor, tended the flower beds, fed the birds, and never bothered anyone. "It's a beautiful day today," he greeted Nayli, lifting his old-fashioned hat. "Terrible. My feet are all blistered," she mumbled back. "My son's been on my nerves since winter. Work's a mess. It's not beautiful. Feet will heal. Work is not a wolf. And I can fix my son," Daniel shouted and went about his business. "He left his mother. Dumped her," Nayli grumbled. "I was like you when I was young." Nayli, the neighbor, suddenly changed his tone. "I also scolded my daughter for falling in love early. She married a tailor instead of a military man." Nayli, who had a lot of unfriendly thoughts swirling around in her head, suddenly had them scattering like sparrows from a bush. "And nothing. She's graduated from the institute, teaches dancing to kids. Happy. Her eyes are shining. And now I'm happy about my granddaughter, Nayli. I took her to the circus when she was little. Now she's running from school with a certificate. Grandpa. She's all grown up now." Daniel sat down on the bench next to Nayli. "What does this have to do with my son?" she asked in bewilderment. "It has to do with the fact that you have to let your children go in time, that you can't make a bed for them everywhere, so let them make their own mistakes and learn their own way. You want it better, but can he have it better in his head?" The old man looked at Nayli carefully. "How could he know?" the woman began. The old man interrupted her and looked into her eyes clearly, but slightly sternly. "Do you want to see your grandchildren?" There was something in that look that made Nayli's inner rebel surrender, embarrassed, hide in a far corner. "I do," she said, barely audibly. "And if you keep fighting with your son, you won't see it." Daniel folded his hands on the hilt of his cane. It's about time he flew out of the nest and made his own. Is he a boy? Let's go. Nayli sighed. The elderly neighbor simply and without ceremony revealed the truth that she had feared all her life and did not want to admit that her son would grow up sooner or later, that he would not replace her husband. Life really isn't just about numbers and controlling every event around her. Nayli turned all suitors away, fearing they would take up her living space, and ended up alone. She drove the girls away from her son, and he still chose the one he liked. She did not spare even the students, even though they diligently studied her subjects and were afraid of absences. She only pointed, controlled, criticized, seeking to fill the void in her own soul. No matter how you look at it, it's a beautiful day. Daniel drew an air noisily and shouted happily, pointing to a tree. Look, a tit. He watched the bird with interest. Nayli nodded and smiled. The black and white bird hopped about the branches with a stick in its beak. At one point it dropped its find, made a loud squeak, and then flew to the ground, picked up the wand and flew away with it. Tiana and Matthew gathered in the village in the early morning of May 1st to help Aunt Lexi with chores for the holiday, cleaning up the grounds, planting vegetables. In the evening the plan was kebabs, baked potatoes, and a picnic. The young people had already left the house and were packing their bags with things in the car. Suddenly Matthew was called by a familiar voice. He turned around. "Mom, how are you here?" He was surprised. "I mean, how did you find me?" Tiana froze in front of the car. She was overcome by the echoes of that nasty feeling, when in winter she stood on the doorstep of a stranger's apartment and listened to nasty things about herself. "Old friends helped," Nayli answered. "I wanted to talk about everything that had happened." Her mother's voice was unaccustomedly soft, not dictatorial. There was a hint that she was holding them back. Or maybe it was something else. "Mom, if you're talking about the same thing again, my decision hasn't changed." Matthew grabbed his bag of things. "No, son, Suddenly tears came out of Nayli's voice and she began to wipe them away with her fingers. Tiana and Matthew were hurrying Tiana to get her out of her stupor, and Matthew because he had never seen his mother cry in his life. There were times he wondered if she was even capable of it. The boy hastily put his arm around the woman and began to soothe her. "Don't cry, Mom, everything is fine. What's wrong?" "Oh, Matthew, son, I have so much to tell you." Nayli turned to Tiana, "and to apologize to you. Come with us to the village." Matthew looked at his mother. "We'll rest, we'll sit, we'll get to know everyone. It's a holiday, it's spring." He nodded to Tiana, and she tilted her head in agreement, showing that she supported the idea. Aunt Lexi took the unexpected guest's visit well. Tiana had never told her about what had happened between her and her chosen one's mother, so the acquaintance was easy and relaxed. Nayli and Aunt Lexi found common ground surprisingly quickly and began discussing recipes while sitting at a table in front of the porch. Matthew had pulled the table from the kitchen in anticipation of the evening's gatherings. The women tried to help the young men clean up the grounds, but they only waved their hands. "Why are you staring at your mom like you're seeing her for the first time?" Tiana nudged Matthew lightly with her elbow as they cleaned up last year's dry leaves and branches from the vegetable garden. "I saw her for the first time." The young man leaned his gloved hands on the handle of the rake. "Not a real one. How is this woman different from the one who all my childhood fed me porridge, according to the regimen, scolded me for being 2 minutes late?" By evening, when all the pressing matters were over, the kebabs were fried and the table was set, the small group finally sat down together. Nayli, who had traveled light from the city, covered herself with a fur shawl. Aunt Lexi got the house wine, set out the best appetizers. She'd even laid a festive white tablecloth, which everyone had persistently discouraged her from doing. When, if not tonight, the stubborn hostess diligently straightened the corners and smoothed the pattern in the center. Tiana turned on the antique radio, which, like a grasshopper, stuck its long antenna whiskers out the window, and the chatter of the presenters and retro songs came on. The evening became especially soulful when it got dark and some smooth melody played on the airwaves. Nelly suddenly rose from the table, glass in hand. "I want to apologize," she began, taking a deep breath. "First and foremost to you, Tiana. I behaved abominably. I apologize for my rudeness, my arrogance. I can see that my son is happy with you, and for any mother, that is what matters most." Tiana smiled with one eye at Nelly's mute question. As she continued, "I want to apologize to you, Matthew. I've tried to be the best mother for you, to replace your father and grandparents. But in this list of duties and discipline, I forgot about the simple moments of warmth, childhood joys, and your dreams. Forgive me, my boy." She discreetly took the napkin from her son's hands and blotted her wet eyes again. "Mother, you'd better stop it." "There's no need to apologize." Matthew took the woman's hand. No, I know what I'm saying," Nelly interrupted him. She looked at Aunt Lexi. "And I want to apologize to you too." "Why should I apologize?" The hostess splayed her hands, nearly knocking over the decanter. "To you and all the people who live in the villages. I always thought of them as second class, uneducated and stupid. I see now that I was terribly mistaken. It was only in my old age that I realized the blinders I'd been wearing all my life." Nelly exhaled and drank all that was in the glass in a gulp. "Oh, what a useless girl you are. We need a vegetable garden, and we have rattles in our hands." Aunt Lexi scolded her. "But since tonight is such an evening, I have something to say, too." Matthew looked around at the crowd. "The first news is that I've been hired as a paralegal. After the semester ends, I'm going to start practicing my profession. The second," he turned to Tiana, who was all animated with anticipation. For her, the news of the paralegal was indeed a surprise. But the real surprises were ahead. Tiana. Matthew turned to her with his whole body. "I'd like to believe that a girl like you wouldn't give up the humble burden of being a lawyer's wife." That's how it happened that night. "Will you marry me?" Matthew asked. Aunt Lexi opened her mouth in surprise. Nelly let a second wave of tears fall, barely recovering from her loud apology. Tiana stared in amazement at the thin, dainty ring in a simple box. "I'll do it with the cab driver's husband," she exclaimed, jumped up and hugged Matthew tightly, not believing what was happening. After the hugs, congratulations, and toasts, they began a loud discussion about the upcoming wedding. Aunt Lexi said the celebration should be a village tradition. Nelly argued with her, insisting on a restaurant. Matthew intervened when the relatives got to the point of discussing the festive table. "No one is getting married yet. It's too early to plan hot salads," he calmly reassured them. "Women should plan ahead," Nelly replied. That's right, Aunt Lexi said. "What if I don't have enough pickles?" Tiana laughed out loud. Everyone else laughed too. It was past midnight when they decided to call it a night. Matthew took his mother into the house. Nelly was tired from the events, the long journey, and the revelations, so she fell asleep, barely touching her pillow. Tiana and Aunt Lexi were clearing the table. The woman suddenly froze as she carried the plates into the house. "What is it, Auntie?" Tiana asked, noticing it. "I told you that Pebble was good luck," sneaky Aunt Lexi said with a sly squint. "Now it's going to decorate the second wedding." Tiana looked at her reflection in the glass of the veranda, where her face was reflected in the bright lantern like a mirror. Her hair and earrings with Ural emeralds glistened. Overhearing the conversation between her son and daughter-in-law, Maria Petrovna was numb. She heard such a thing, she gathered. "Albert, we can't go on like this," Linda exclaimed indignantly. "How much longer are we going to be crammed into this tiny room? The baby's coming, and we don't even have a place to put the cot. What can I do?" Albert didn't even turn round, still staring at the monitor. "You know, we can't take out a mortgage. We need money for a down payment. And because of your whims, we can't save up any money. Let's move in with your parents. They have a bigger flat than this one, 2 rooms, but separate. And the kitchen is bigger. Linda, and your mummy will live here alone like a queen. Besides, you know my daddy's very sick. He needs peace and quiet. Besides, he and my mum live in separate rooms. And you're suggesting we put them in the same room? They'd fight all the time. Mummy likes to watch soap operas all day and Daddy hates them. No, I'm not going to let my parents be bullied." "Yeah," Albert nodded. "So you can bully my mum?" He raised his voice. "She already doesn't know where to get away from your eternal discontent. She only comes into the kitchen when you're not home. And she's the landlady, not you." "So live with your mum," Linda cried. "I'll go away. And when the baby is born, I'll raise it myself. And you won't even see it." "Linda, calm down," Albert hugged his wife. "You mustn't worry. I'll think of something. Just be patient." Amelia sat on the sofa in the next room and listened to the conversation between her son and daughter-in-law. "What can you think of?" She sighed heavily. "Albert works all day long as it is. Even on Saturdays he is not at home. His salary is small, he can't afford a flat. I can understand Linda too. She wants to be the boss of her own flat. And here I am, an old woman, disturbing them." She lay down on the sofa and closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but sleep did not come to her. But memories came back to her mind. Amelia had raised Albert alone, without a husband. As it happened, she was unattractive, tall, thin. And she didn't dress fashionably. What man would pay attention to such a thing? She came to the city from the country. She entered a school for painters and plasterers, lived in a dormitory. And after graduation, she got a job in a construction organization, from which she got a small room in a communal flat. She worked on weekends, went to the village, helped her mother to take care of the vegetable garden. Her mother called her back home, but Amelia refused. "I don't want to go back to the village. There's nothing to do here, and it's not interesting," she said. "You can't go back to your parents' house." Her mother chastised her. "You should have looked for a bloke here. You'd get married, and then you'd have kids. But you live in your town like an old woman. You'll end up like an old maid. You're nearly 30 years old, and you've never even had a man, have you?" Amelia resented her mother and promised she wouldn't visit her for a long time after such talk. But on Saturday, she took the bus back to her home village. She had no friends in the city, and those with whom she was friends were married, had children, and were busy with their own worries. The only thing left was to spend all her weekends in the village. And on Monday morning, the first bus back to the city. It was on this bus that she met Nicholas, who was returning from the wedding of an army friend. He helped her carry the heavy bag of potatoes and pickles her mother had packed to the house where she lived, and suggested that they meet the next day. Amelia was hesitant at first, but then agreed. She liked Nicholas for his courtesy and his easy, cheerful disposition. At work all day, she thought about what she would wear on her first date, and decided to wear a dark blue skirt and a white jumper. She didn't have anything else in her wardrobe. "You look like you're dressed for a party meeting," Nicholas joked when he saw Amelia. All right, no offense. It was a joke." "Well, why don't we not go to the cinema, but take a walk in the park?" Amelia suggested. She was afraid to stay with Nicholas in the dark, even in the cinema, which was full of people. "Well, in the park." So in the park, he took her by the hand. "Can I buy you an ice cream?" he asked. When he saw that the girl shook her head negatively, he shrugged again. They walked leisurely along the park alley and talked. Or rather, Nicholas spoke alone, and Amelia listened to him attentively and laughed at his jokes. Once a young lieutenant was sent to our unit, Nicholas said with a laugh. As soon as I saw him, I was stunned. It turned out to be Austin. He and I lived in the same house, even went to the same school. Only he was a few years younger. I was in my second year of service, soon to be discharged. So Nicholas lit a cigarette. I met a girl at that time, even you could say. We had an affair. All my leave was spent with her. And it was a young business. I wanted to see her more often. But you can't go, oh, Walla Patrol will stop you at once. Yes, they can put you in the brig, and then you won't be able to see her at all. So that's what I came up with. I started asking Austin for his lieutenant's uniform. Officers' uniforms didn't stop patrols in the city, so they could move around freely. Took me a long time to convince him that countrymen should help each other out, that sort of thing. And I did, because when Austin was on holiday, I'd put on his uniform and go out on the town. I did it once, I did it again. And the third time I came back to the unit, I ran into my own Oliver. How surprised he was to see me wearing my lieutenant's epaulettes. I never went on leave again for the rest of my tour. What did they do to Austin? Did they punish him too? Amelia asked anxiously. No, Nicholas waved his hand. I didn't give him away. He said he'd borrowed the uniform, and from whom I do not know. From Nicholas's story, Amelia learned that he lived in a hostel and worked at the factory as a milling machine operator. He has never been married and has no plans to marry. It's too early for me to have a family, he said, and lit another cigarette. I look at my friends who have already got married. So it's a deadly bore. And if you get a bad wife, it's a disaster. My mate Ashley, he's rushing home after work. I say to him, Ashley, let's have a beer. Take the edge off, and he tells me that if his wife smells alcohol, she'll make a scene, and from his body for a week. And what about the children? Amelia wondered. Don't you want to be a father already? Children? Nicholas grinned. I never wanted to have them. It's a lot of trouble. First you have to get up at night, then take them to daycare, then do homework with them, and how much money is spent on them. And in the end, you don't know what your son or daughter will grow up to be. Our foreman Michael's son went downhill. Got mixed up with a bad crowd. Almost ended up in juvie. What's he got to look forward to? Father's a respectable man, mother's a librarian, and the kid grows up to be a thug. Maybe he lacked parental attention. Amelia suggested. The son has shoes, clothes. What kind of attention is needed? Nicholas objected. Nobody took care of me when I was a kid either. My father died early. My mother worked 2 jobs to feed me and my sister. And nothing. I grew up a decent man. I work, and I send money to my mother. Amelia didn't answer, though she disagreed with Nicholas about family and children. Perhaps he doesn't realize yet that children are a great happiness, she thought. How can one not love them? They walked round the park some more, and Nicholas walked Amelia home. He didn't ask her out again, and Amelia decided that she didn't like Nicholas, and he didn't want to continue hanging out with her anymore. She was surprised to see Nicholas sitting on a bench outside her driveway a few days later on her way home from work. Oh, Amelia was embarrassed, adjusting the dress she'd been wearing that day. I didn't even expect to see you again. Maybe we should go for a walk, Nicholas suggested, getting up from the bench. The weather's so nice. Amelia nodded her head in agreement, and they walked towards the small square. She was very embarrassed by her appearance, but Nicholas didn't seem to mind. He was joking again, talking ironically about his friends, and not asking Amelia about anything. Yes, she had nothing to tell about herself. She lived in the village, studied, now she works. That's all. Would anyone be interested in that? At the entrance, Nicholas suggested that Amelia meet at the weekend and still go to the cinema for an interesting film that had recently been released. Once again, Amelia agreed. She was very pleased that a guy like Nicholas was paying attention to her. So they started dating. And 2 months later, Nicholas stayed in her room for a sleepover. Amelia did not want to invite him to the flat, but he was persistent, saying that he would only have a cup of tea and go to his dormitory. How they ended up in the same bed, Amelia didn't exactly realize. Nicholas's kisses were so sweet that she felt as if she had lost her head. "So I'm your first man?" Nicholas asked in surprise. "I didn't expect it. Why didn't you tell me right away? I would have been more gentle with you." Amelia didn't say anything. She was ashamed. She sat on the bed with her legs tucked under her and the blanket covering her. "Why are you so scared, you silly girl?" Nicholas tried to touch Amelia, but she recoiled. "You should have had your baby a long time ago. And you've been walking around?" He swore foully. "Well, I'm going to go. It's getting late. They might not let me into the dormitory. We're strict about that." After seeing Nicholas off, Amelia went back to her room and couldn't sleep until morning, remembering what had happened between them. "I don't even know what he'll think of me now," Amelia worried. "And he'll refuse to date me since I'm so easily available." But Nicholas began to visit her 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes they went to the cinema, but more often Amelia fed him dinner, and then they went to bed, and Nicholas stayed with her all night. "I wish I could marry him," Amelia looked fondly at the sleeping Nicholas. "Why, he's a hard-working bloke, and the fact that he drinks a lot of beer is no big deal. That's why he's a man. And who doesn't drink nowadays?" Amelia closed her eyes and imagined herself in a white wedding dress and long veil. As she and Nicholas walked out of the registry office, he picks her up in his arms and twirls her round and round, and Amelia laughed happily. She rarely visited her mother in the village. "No time. We have a lot of work," Amelia justified. "I've gone to work at the factory. I'll become an apprentice." "True, my room had to be returned, and I had to move to a dormitory. But they say that they give flats to the front runners of production. So I'm trying my best. I want so much to have a separate place where I would be a mistress." "It's time for you to get married. That's what my mother said admonishingly. You are getting on in years. Are you going to stay a maiden?" "I will not." Amelia lowered her eyes. She hadn't told her mother about Nicholas yet, although they had been dating for a year. When they moved into the dormitory, they didn't see each other as often as before. Only when her roommate Jessie worked a different shift or went to her family for the weekend, Nicholas would come to Amelia's house and stay until the morning. But lately he'd been coming less and less often. Amelia waited for him, heating dinner, and then cried into her pillow. One day on her day off, Amelia had breakfast with her roommate Jessie. She had cooked a delicious scrambled egg and was now happily eating it, helping with a slice of bread. Amelia had barely brought her fork to her mouth when she felt dizzy and barely made it to the toilet. "What's the matter with you?" Jessie asked in surprise. "Are you pregnant?" "I'm not." Amelia smiled strangely. "I must have been poisoned yesterday. I bought a pie on the street. I thought it looked suspicious." "Yeah," Jessie grinned. "My mom's been pregnant 5 times and she used to say the same thing. For milk, for pies. You should go to a woman's doctor and get yourself checked out. Don't tell me you've never been with a bloke. I found cigarette butts in my room more than once. So you brought him here while I was away." Amelia blushed up to her ears and skewed her lower lip. "You think it was me? There's no way anyone could have come into the room." Go to the clinic." Jessie continued to insist. "It won't be too late. You can have an abortion before it's too late. What are you going to do with a child now? No flat, no mother to help you." All right. Amelia nodded her head. To calm you down, I'll go to the doctor, then we'll laugh together. But there was no laughing. Amelia was indeed pregnant. She came out of the antenatal clinic and didn't know what to do next. Sitting down on a bench, Amelia thought, "We should tell Nicholas everything. As it happens, he has to marry me now. He's not going to give up his own child." She cheered up, got up from the bench, and went home. Waiting until the weekend, when Jeezy was away at her parents' house, Amelia waited for Nicholas to tell him that he was going to be a father. Nicholas was late that day and didn't arrive until the evening drunk. A friend had a son, he told Amelia from the doorstep, so we had a little celebration. He came into the room and sat down on a chair. He already had 2 daughters, but Scott just wanted a son. A son is a son. Nicholas held up his index finger. An heir. What would you do if you knew you were going to have a son soon? Amelia asked cautiously. Nicholas hesitated. The devil knows. He put his foot on his leg. Never thought about it. And if you think about it? Amelia looked at him slyly. Well, I suppose I'd be glad, Nicholas said uncertainly. Why do you ask such questions? Well, then rejoice. Amelia clapped her hands. I'm pregnant, and I'm sure that we'll have a boy. Stop. Nicholas wiped his face with the palm of his hand. Who's having a boy? Me and you. Amelia's joy faded a little. We do. I've already been to the doctor, who confirmed that I'm going to be a mum and you're going to be a dad. Isn't that great? Now you and I can get married and get our own flat as soon as possible. Married? Nicholas was startled. Why? What do you mean? Amelia was upset. We need our child to have a mom and a dad. Or do you mind? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't mind in principle. Nicholas got up from his chair and started walking toward the door. I'm going to go. I need to think it over. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk about it. Okay, Amelia agreed nonchalantly. Tomorrow is tomorrow, but come before lunchtime, because Jay-Z might be back early. But neither tomorrow, nor the day after tomorrow, nor a week later, Nicholas did not come. Desperate, Amelia went to the neighboring factory to look for Nicholas and find out what had happened to him. But she was shocked by the news that Nicholas Morris had been paid and had gone somewhere. Not even his closest mates knew where. Amelia couldn't believe that Nicholas had abandoned her, too. Not just her, but their unborn child. What am I going to do now? She sobbed as she sank into her pillow. What? Jesse grinned. You need an abortion. It's no big deal. You're not the first, you're not the last. I'm not going to kill my baby. Amelia covered her still flat belly with her hands. I'll raise it myself alone, and we don't need no daddy. She buried her head in the pillow again and cried even louder. Yes, it's a mess, sighed Jay-Z. What are you going to tell your mother? I thought you said she was strict. Aha, Amelia exclaimed. I'll have to tell her. She wouldn't kill her own daughter. Besides, she'd just been dreaming of grandchildren. The next weekend, Amelia went to the village. Mrs. Anna shook her head. I haven't heard a word from you for 2 months. Come on, get dressed and go to the garden. You can help dig potatoes. Amelia dug potatoes, but refused to take the buckets full of them into the cellar. What's the matter? Mrs. Anna was angry. The town has spoiled you so much that you can't help your mother. I shouldn't be lifting weights right now. Amelia lowered her eyes. The doctor said not to. Is something wrong? Are you ill? Mrs. Anna looked at her daughter anxiously. What did the doctor say? "Mom, I'm pregnant." Amelia, after a moment's silence, blurted out at the top of her lungs and backed away, afraid her mother would hit her with a spade. "Yes," said Mrs. Anna. "It's a long way off. If there's a hole, there'll be a hole. Who's the father? Do you know him well?" Amelia dodged the question. "Well, we met." Mrs. Anna rubbed her lower back. "Come next weekend. I'll heat the sauna, set the table. Come on. The future son-in-law can butter me up. He can bring me a glass of water in my old age." "It's only my child." Amelia lowered her head. "I will bring him up alone." "Eh, said Mrs. Anna. "I've lost my maiden honor and forgotten it. Have you thought how I'll look in people's eyes? They'll say Amelia Robinson's a girl in an interesting position. What a shame." Mrs. Anna was indignant. "What do you think I should do?" "Do what?" Amelia took a couple of steps back again. "Give birth, of course. I'm not getting rid of the baby, and I don't care if they point the finger at me." "What can I do with you now?" Mrs. Anna sighed. "The girl's not old enough. Maybe a child will brighten your loneliness." In the evening, they sat at the table for a long time, discussing how to live their lives and what would be best for the unborn baby. They decided that Amelia would stay in town so that there would be no cause for rumors in the village. And it was better to give birth there. The doctors were close by. She'll also go to the trade union and push for a separate flat. Like a single mom. Mrs. Anna will sell all the animals, close the house, and move in with her daughter to help with the baby. Amelia will go to work because she has to earn money. There's no one else to help. And Mrs. Ann will look after her grandson and run the household. Just a month before the birth, Amelia moved into a small one-room flat, and soon Mrs. Anna arrived from the village. At the due date, Amelia gave birth to a son, whom she named Albert. When in the maternity hospital she was brought her son for the first time and pressed him to her breast, she immediately realized that this boy was the meaning of her life. 3 months later, Amelia went to work. For some reason, she had no milk, and the pediatrician advised her to switch the boy to formula feeding. Because of this, Amelia was very worried about not being able to feed her son herself. She wanted to give her child the best, so she did not refuse any overtime, sometimes working 2 shifts in a row at the machine. The foreman turned a blind eye to this. For him, the main thing was to fulfill the plan. Mrs. Anna finally settled in the city. Only she wouldn't sell her house in the village. "When Albert grows up," she said, "we'll go to the village for the whole summer." Let the boy Albert breathe fresh air. 2 years later, the factory gave Amelia a small 2-room flat with a pass-through room and a small kitchen. But Amelia and her mother were happy about it. "Albert will go to school, and he'll have his own room," Mrs. Anna said proudly. "And you and me, my daughter, will share a room. And if you have to get married, I won't get in your way. I'll go back to the village." No, Amelia shook her head. "I'm not going to get married. What if a father who isn't my own starts hurting my little boy? And what do I need a husband for? It's only trouble." After a while, Mrs. Anna suddenly began to complain of pain in her heart, although she had no problems with it before. And her blood pressure was constantly rising. And no medication helped. Doctors helplessly waved their hands and advised to change the climate for a while. After consulting Amelia, Mrs. Anna decided to go to her village for a couple of months to live in peace and quiet, not in the hustle and bustle of the city. Albert was already in kindergarten, and Amelia had to transfer to another shop to work only the day shift. In the village, Mrs. Anna came alive, even managed to make a few beds. In the vegetable garden, carrots and turnips, vitamins for Albert, she said. One morning, a neighbor came to her house, brought a can of steamed milk, and saw Mrs. Anna lying on the floor. The neighbor started calling for help, but it was too late. Mrs. Anna had been dead for a couple of hours. Amelia took a long time to get over her mother's death and blamed herself for letting the sick woman go alone to the village. But life went on. In addition, Albert demanded attention, and Amelia's heartache at losing her mother began to subside a little. Soon she sold her parents' house in the village. With this money, she made some repairs in the flat and renewed the furniture in the room of her son, who was soon to go to the first grade. Again, Amelia worked hard. In addition to her main job at the factory, in the evening she washed the entrances to the house. She needed money, which she spent without regret on her son Albert. He had everything he wanted: an expensive football, toys, table hockey. Amelia tried to make sure that the boy, who was growing up without a father, did not need anything. When returning from work, Amelia always went to the shop and bought Albert sweets. She bought fruit for him exclusively at the market, as well as cottage cheese, meat, and fish. There were times when wages were delayed at the factory and there was only money left in her purse for traveling. Even then, Amelia managed to feed her son something tasty, inventing her own recipes and using what she could find in the fridge. She herself might not eat it all these days, or she would wait for what Albert left on his plate. The most important thing for her was that her son never went hungry. She looked at her son fondly when he ate, and she didn't even worry that she would be left without lunch at work tomorrow. She did her best: malnutrition, lack of sleep. She was very tired, working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs. But she never complained because she did it all for the sake of her favorite son, Albert. Albert himself did not cause his mother much trouble. He studied well at school, played sports, and attended an aeromodeling club. Amelia was proud of her son and blushed with embarrassment when he was praised at parents' meetings for participating in sports events or helping to clean up the school grounds. When he was in high school, Albert began to work part-time himself, cleaning entrances to help his mother. He was shy, but he never refused to unload goods in a shop or help someone carry heavy things. He always used the proceeds to buy his mother her favorite Palanca sponge cake, or they would go to an ice cream parlor together and Albert would pay for it himself, proudly taking the money out of his pocket. Amelia was happy to have such an attentive and caring son, telling everyone she knew about him. After graduating from high school, Albert enrolled at the Polytechnic University. He wanted to apply to a construction technical school, but his mother Amelia insisted that he must have a higher education, which no one in their family had ever had. After classes, Albert worked part-time again, either as a loader in a warehouse or as a waiter in a cafe. Amelia now did not clean the entrances, and at the factory she moved to the receiving department, because after a long time working at the machine, her legs were very sore. All in all, they were doing well. The only thing that upset Amelia was that Albert would not introduce her to any girl and did not want to marry her. And Amelia wanted to have grandchildren. "Mum, why should I get married?" he said, laughing. "I'm fine as I am. Who else will take care of me like you? And I have nothing to offer a girl my own flat, no car too. And I don't make much money yet. Not many people would go for that. But you're handsome and clever." Amelia looked at her son with love. "The rest is a matter of time. What do you need a flat for? You can live here. There's plenty of room for everyone. And when I die, you'll be the masters of the whole place." "No, Mum, I don't want to." Albert shook his head. "You and I are good together." After the institute, Albert got a job. From time to time, he met one girl or the other, but he did not start any serious relationships. Everything changed when he met Linda, a tall, blue-eyed beauty with long blonde hair. They met at a birthday party at a mutual friend's house and left together. Albert walked the girl to her house, agreeing that they would see each other again in a few days. Linda was 4 years younger than Albert, had also graduated from university and worked as a marketer in a trading company. She talked interestingly about the countries she had traveled to and her work. Linda was so light and cheerful that she literally turned Albert's head. They had already been dating for 6 months when Albert decided to introduce Linda to his mother. "Mom, I finally met the girl of my dreams and I want you to meet her," he announced one evening. "Oh, son, I'm so glad." Amelia splashed her hands. "We must set the table. I'll bake pies with cabbage and potatoes as you like. What is your girlfriend like?" "Linda doesn't eat anything sweet or flowery," Albert grinned. "She's on a diet to keep her figure. So don't cook anything. We'll just have tea. I'll buy a low-fat cake myself." "It's not very human," Amelia shrugged. "A new person comes into the house, and we can't even give them a proper meal." "Don't worry, Mom." Albert put his arm round Amelia's shoulders. "The main thing for me is that you like each other." "I'll like any girl you like, son," Amelia stroked her son's head. "The main thing is that she loves you, and you love her too. I want you to be happy." But no matter what Amelia said, she didn't like Linda. "She's a tricky one," she said to herself as Albert left to walk Linda home. She smiles sweetly, but her eyes are evil. Oh, this new fashion. A slice of cake and a cup of tea, that's all the treat. But it was evident that Albert loved her, and that was important. "I'll get used to her somehow," Amelia decided. "My grandmother used to say a hen pecking at a grain. She keeps the whole yard in her memory." "Mum, what do you think of Linda?" Albert asked excitedly when he got home. "Isn't she beautiful?" "She's beautiful," Amelia agreed, nodding her head. "But she's very thin. What keeps her soul alive? Do you love her?" "Very much." Albert averted his eyes in embarrassment. "And I want her to be my wife." "Now it's time for you to marry," Amelia smiled. "Well, son, so be it." They decided to have the wedding in 3 months, so that they would have time to prepare for it. Albert told Linda at once that they would live with his mom. "You see, Linda," he said, "we have no extra money for rented accommodation. We'll have to spend a lot of money on the wedding. And I've already bought the honeymoon vouchers. In the meantime, we'll live with my mom in a separate room, save money for the down payment, and take a mortgage on the flat. My mom's very nice. I think you'll get along with her." "Of course, my love," Linda replied gently. "You're absolutely right. Why pay money to strangers when you have somewhere to live? We'll be patient for a while, but then we'll move into a bigger and more spacious flat." Linda answered in a way that made Albert like her even more. She had not thought about a future life with her mother-in-law. She knew the saying, "Patience and hard work will get you through it." The wedding was celebrated in a restaurant. The bride's parents insisted on it. Amelia was uncomfortable. She had never been to such a place. Every now and then she was adjusting the new dress she had bought for the celebration. And when she sat down at the table, she took off her shoes with a small heel, which stung, but were very beautiful and matched the dress. Through tears, she looked at her grown son in his dark blue suit and white flower in his buttonhole. She was proud that she alone had managed to raise such a handsome boy, who might soon become a father himself. And she, Amelia, would have long awaited grandchildren. Linda was also very pretty. In a snow-white long dress, she looked like a porcelain statue. The guests kept shouting. Bitter, the bride and groom rose from their seats and kissed embarrassedly. "And I've never had a wedding. And I've never worn a white dress either," Amelia suddenly thought. But she immediately dismissed the thought. What's there to be jealous of? She was angry with herself. You should be happy. My only son is getting married. My pride and support in my old age. The bride's parents said that the wedding should be celebrated in half. "We realize, of course, that you're on a tight budget," Miranda said when they met Amelia before the wedding. "We're not rich either, but we do value our only children, so we don't have to make a mess of it in front of the guests." Amelia didn't know what rich people were and tried to object. We don't have many guests on our side. No relatives. Albert will invite a few of his mates from school and work. That's all. It doesn't matter, Miranda said. Just be thankful we're not making you buy the bride's outfit. Like we used to? Believe me, it's not cheap. Laura picked out a dress at the salon for her. She named the cost of the dress. A price that made Amelia gasp. Well, Miranda continued, we're not going to skimp on our own daughter. A wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Well, maybe 2, she thought. 3 at the most. So we need the bride to be the most beautiful. Amelia withdrew all the money from her book, which wasn't much. She borrowed the rest from acquaintances, which she paid back for a year, limiting herself in many things. She had no money for a present for the young people. She remembered that her mother had given her gold earrings with red stones, so she decided to give them to her daughter-in-law. Linda fiddled with the earrings. She wrinkled her nose, but thanked her mother-in-law and gave the earrings to her mother, who immediately hid them in her purse. Immediately after the wedding, Albert and Linda left for their honeymoon, and Amelia began to organize their room. She washed the window, changed the curtains, and made the bed with new linen. She put a small rug on the floor. Good, she sighed with satisfaction as she looked into the room. When Linda and Albert get back, we'll be a family. Fie, what are those curtains? Linda was outraged when she entered the room. It's like the country. Well, of course they are. Amelia was confused. I bought them a long time ago, but I kept saving them, regretting such a beauty. So the curtains had to come in handy. The room became cozier at once. What's this? Linda saw a rug on the floor. It's very rustic. Do you want to make our room into a rustic hut for Albert and me? Mum, really? Albert supported her. We'll sort it out ourselves. Do as you please. Amelia took offense and left the room. From the open door, she could hear Linda's continued outrage and Albert's affectionate reassurance. In the kitchen, Linda also immediately put her own order. The bottom shelf in the fridge is yours. Put your food there, and we'll put it on the middle and top shelves. We'll eat separately because I'm on a diet. I'm cooking everything low-fat. It's time for Albert to start thinking about his health. Linda brought some nice crockery from her parents, pots and pans, a small frying pan. There was only room for Amelia in one narrow cupboard, 2 pots, a couple of plates, a cup and a few other kitchen utensils. Linda packed everything else into a large bag and took it to the rubbish bin. Why do you keep all this stuff? She was indignant again. Gold-rimmed mugs, 3 plates, bent spoons. Who needs it? My mother brought it from the village, she answered timidly. How could I get rid of it? There are so many beautiful sets for sale. Linda sighed. And you can't get rid of a rustic. Linda continued to tidy up the flat, which had been literally transformed. In her and Albert's room, there was a new sofa and a small wardrobe. There were blinds on the windows and a plasma TV on the wall opposite the sofa. In the bathroom, Albert had installed shelves on which stood jars of creams, shampoo, and other feminine products that Amelia didn't understand. Son, she asked Albert when Linda wasn't home, did you get a bonus or something? If you bought such a marvelous thing, she pointed to the automatic washing machine. It must be expensive. Mum, Albert laughed. Now you can buy everything on credit. What do you mean? Amelia looked at her son in bewilderment. It's like this: first you buy a thing, and then you pay for it gradually, Albert explained. Everybody lives like that nowadays, and you don't have to save up for years to buy something you need. I'm planning to buy a car that way too, and I'm paying off the TV here, and then I'll take out a new loan. Unless Linda needs a fur coat, he laughed. When do you plan to have children? Amelia asked Albert. Later, Albert said, "We want to live for ourselves first, to see the world. And it will be difficult to do that with children. We'll have to spend a lot of money on nappies and nappy covers." Sometimes Linda's friends came to visit. They'd sit in the kitchen for long periods of time, smoking. It gave Amelia a headache and she couldn't sleep all night. But she didn't say anything to her son or daughter-in-law. What are the young ones to do? Old age will come, and you won't want to socialize with anyone. Twice a year, Linda and Albert went on holiday. And then Amelia felt like a full-fledged mistress in the flat. She could sit at the table in the kitchen for long periods of time, watch television, cook leisurely, standing at the cooker. And most importantly, she enjoyed the silence. No one walked back and forth across her room, and she could sleep well at night. When Amelia retired a few years later, it became even more difficult to live in the flat. Linda wasn't working by then either. She had quit her old job and was looking for a new one. But she was in no hurry to get a new job. But she was always reproaching Albert for not earning enough money. Linda slept until lunchtime, during which time Amelia had time to eat breakfast and prepare her own food so that she would not disturb her daughter-in-law in the kitchen. Linda liked to sit at the table for a long time with one foot on the chair, take her time drinking coffee, smoking 1 or 2 cigarettes, and looking out of the window somewhere in the distance. Amelia tried to get out of the house by this time, whatever the weather. Amelia would walk down the street, going into shops to keep warm or to hide from the rain. She would return towards evening when Albert came home from work. She felt more at ease with him. Late at night, when they went to their room and switched on the television, Amelia couldn't sleep well, waking up to any noise, Albert going to the toilet, Linda needing to get a glass of water from the kitchen. When Amelia found out that Linda was pregnant, she was overjoyed. Finally, after 5 years, she would have a grandson or granddaughter. She began to imagine walking down the avenue with a pram, looking at the sleeping baby. But what she heard shattered all her dreams. So I'm not wanted here, she got up from the sofa and walked to the window, where it was already dark. Well, she sighed heavily, they have their own family, and I'll live somehow. How much of that life is left? In the morning, when Albert had gone to work, Amelia took out a checkered notebook from her bedside table, tore out a piece of paper and began to write something. She didn't go out for a walk as usual that day, and didn't mind that an irritated Linda was pacing around the flat and even dropped a stool in the kitchen a few times, kicking it with her foot. In the evening, when Albert came home, Amelia came into the kitchen and sat down across from him. "Son, I need to talk to you," she said. "What's wrong, Mum?" Albert looked at her anxiously. "Is it something serious?" "You see, son, it's like this." Amelia was silent for a while. "I have to go away, probably for a long time." "Why?" Where to? Albert wondered. "I got a letter from Aunt Gwen today." Amelia took a small piece of paper out of her pocket and showed it to Albert, but did not hand it to him. "Well, do you remember Aunt Gwen, your grandmother's cousin?" "How would you remember her? When we went to the village, you were very young." "Aunt Gwen says she's ill and needs help," Amelia said quickly, so that her son wouldn't understand. "She has no family left and no one to look after her. So Aunt Gwen asked me to look after her, and in return she'll give me the deed to her house. It's a good house. It'll last 100 years. Then you can sell it, add some money, and buy you a flat." Albert stretched out. "Well, if you have to, go. But let's leave at the weekend so I can walk you to the bus." No, Amelia waved her hands fearfully. "I'll go tomorrow. Aunt Gwen writes to tell me to leave right away. I don't know how long the letter has been traveling. It might be too late. Don't worry. I haven't got much. Why don't Linda at least come with you?" Albert offered tentatively. "What's the matter, son?" She waved her hand again. Linda is in such a state now that she needs to take care of herself. Don't worry, I'll get there myself. How's that? You know, Albert got up from the table. Will you be back in time for the birth of our child? I don't know. Amelia shook her head. I'm not going to guess. I don't know how things will turn out. Maybe I'll live there and stay there for good. So you can use the flat as you see fit, move into the big room. And you can make a nursery in the small one. Well, it's up to you. We'll figure it out. Albert left the kitchen and went into the room, where Linda's joyful voice could be heard. Amelia tore up the letter she had written to herself that morning and threw it in the rubbish bin. Then she went back to her room, opened the wardrobe and started pulling out her things, putting them into a small traveling bag. Almost 3 years had passed. Albert and Linda's family life was not going well. She reproached her husband for not devoting time to her or their little daughter. Albert replied that he worked 2 jobs so that the family did not need anything, because Linda's needs were growing more and more every day. And it was taking a lot of money for the baby. Over time, Albert realized that he probably didn't really love Linda, but was just fascinated by her beauty and attractiveness. And now it was as if a veil had fallen from his eyes. Linda turned out to be a very scandalous wife. She wanted Albert to help her around the house and earn a lot. He did not refuse to help his wife, coming back from work, bringing groceries. On rare weekends, he cleaned the flat and cooked meals. But he resented the fact that Linda sat all day on the phone, texting with girlfriends or ordering some things through an online shop. She did not do much with her daughter, who fortunately grew up a very quiet child and could play with toys on her own, without causing her mother much trouble. In addition, Albert was very offended at his wife for naming the newborn girl Angelina without consulting him. What kind of name is that? Albert was outraged at the time. I thought we were going to name our daughter Iris or Joyce or maybe Laura. Phew, Linda replied, embarrassed. Iris, Joyce. It's like the countryside, but Angelina. It's trendy and modern. Linda was supported by her mother-in-law, and Albert waved his hand. Call it what you like. Only his father-in-law sided with him. They'll call the girl Oliver laughed, like a cow in an advert. The family was always short of money. Instead of saving a little, Linda ordered cosmetics and clothes she hardly ever wore. The wardrobe was full of her stuff. Those cosmetics were still in her nightstand drawer. Stop wasting money. Albert once told his wife, "We'll never save for our own flat." Why do we need a flat? Linda wondered. We're doing fine here for now. When Angelina grows up a little more, we'll exchange this flat for a bigger place. What do you mean? Albert looked at her in confusion. Actually, my mom is also registered here. She's gone to the country for a while. She can come back at any moment. This is already our flat. Linda looked at her husband angrily. Look, she circled the room with her hand. Where are we going to put your mom? And anyway, if she hasn't come here for so many years, she won't come back now. Albert thought about it. He hadn't heard from his mom in 3 years. He had never even visited her in the village. He decided that he would have to go there next weekend to see how she was doing. Maybe she needs some help. But soon Albert forgot about his promise. He got busy at work and had another fight with Linda. Or rather, they fought every night now. He hardly got home, and his mother-in-law was adding fuel to the fire. Other husbands to their wives and buy fur coats. And take to resorts, she said with a complaint son-in-law. And you in life, even a gold ring, cannot give a gift, which she has long dreamed of. So let her find a husband who will provide her with everything. Albert snapped back. Since I'm so bad. And she will nod at the mother-in-law. A beautiful girl like my daughter will never be left alone. She deserves the best. So let her go to the best. Albert couldn't stand it one day when his mother-in-law again reproached him for not earning enough money. "I won't cry. Might as well pack my things now and get out of here." "That's right." The mother-in-law proudly raised her head and turned to her daughter. "Linda, get ready. We're not staying in this flat with this worthless man for another minute." Linda defiantly started to take things out of the wardrobe and put them into a large bag. Albert watched silently. "We'll take the baby with us," too. The mother-in-law began to stuff toys into the bag. "My dear Angelina, your father is worthless. If he can't provide not only for his wife but also for his child." "Take it," Albert shrugged indifferently. "Nobody will forbid me to see my daughter anyway." "We'll see about that." The mother-in-law grabbed her granddaughter by the hand and pulled her into the hallway. Linda followed them, dragging her bag. "Don't forget to leave the keys to the flat," Albert reminded her. "Choke on it." Linda took the keys out of her purse and threw them at her husband. "You'll be sorry, but it'll be too late." "Yeah," Albert nodded and slammed the door behind them. Linda cried in the taxi. "Mum, maybe I shouldn't have left Albert." "No way," said her mother firmly. "Let him suffer. You'll see he'll come to you on his knees and beg for forgiveness. But don't be a fool and forgive him at once. Let him buy you a ring and a mink fur coat, which you have long dreamed of." "That's true," Linda wiped her tears. "Let him suffer, and I'll think about whether to forgive him or not." Sweet Angelina sat between her grandmother and mother and didn't understand what was happening. She was very sad that they had left her daddy, whom she loved very much. Albert did not show up at her mother-in-law's and father-in-law's flat the next day or a week later. There was also no call from him on his wife's phone. "Should I call him myself?" Linda asked her mom anxiously. "Don't you dare." Miranda looked at her daughter angrily. "He'll think you're humiliating yourself in front of him, and he'll stop appreciating you. Let's wait a little longer." Albert, meanwhile, felt almost happy. He missed his daughter, but at the same time he enjoyed his bachelor life. He was happy to come home after work, where no one reproached him or made scandals. Albert also realized that he missed his mother, her gentle voice, her care, her hard and yet soft hands. He lay awake all night remembering how he and his mother had gone to a cafe to eat ice cream, and how they had ridden on a merry-go-round in the park, and his mother had clutched her son's hand tightly out of fear. He remembered her fragrant pancakes, delicious pancakes, his favorite potato pies. The next day Albert took a day off work and went to the railway station. When he reached the village, he got out and looked around confused. He didn't know where to go next. He couldn't remember the house where Aunt Gwen and now Mum lived. So he decided to ask the first person he saw for directions. "Excuse me, please," he said to the postman, who was just delivering his pension. "I need to find a house. Only I don't know the landlady's surname. Her name is Gwen, and my mum Amelia lives with her now." "You must know her. You probably bring her a pension too, don't you?" "I don't remember her," grumbled the postman. "There used to be a Mrs. Anna Robinson. She went to the city to see her daughter, and then she came back here and died. Her house has long since been sold." "So that's my grandmother." Albert rejoiced. She had a cousin, Aunt Gwen, whom my mother came to look after. "Oh, I remember," the postman nodded. "You must be talking about Gwen Hopkins." Albert nodded uncertainly. "She's been dead about 7 years since she was buried." "Who did my mum go to then?" Albert looked at the woman, perplexed. "I don't know, my dear, I don't know." The postman shrugged his shoulders and threw his bag from one shoulder to the other. "I've never seen her. Gwen's house is over there." She pointed to the end of the street, behind the green fence. "You'll recognize it." Albert followed the direction and soon found himself standing next to a ramshackle house with a hole in the roof and a rotten porch. "Mom," he covered his face with his hands. "Where am I going to find you now?" He remembered that when his mother had read him the letter, supposedly from Aunt Gwen, her hands had trembled and she had tried not to look at her son, hiding the tears in her eyes. And she had taken very few things with her, and Linda had thrown the rest in the rubbish bin. "How could I not have realized that Mom just didn't want to disturb us?" Albert slapped his hand on his forehead. "She'd spent her whole life trying to make me feel good, and I, the fool, hadn't appreciated it." Back in town, Albert thought about how he could find his mother. The first thing he did was to go to the police and file a missing persons report. They advised him to go to a home for the elderly. Could Amelia be there? So Albert, without delay, went straight to the address. The home for the elderly called Hope was not far from the city. "Can you tell me," he said to the pretty woman in uniform who was sitting at the desk, going through some papers, "is Amelia Robinson in your care?" "Robinson," the woman said thoughtfully. "Let me see." She began flipping through the lists of residents and shook her head in the negative. "No, we don't have her listed. Who does she look like to you?" "That's my mom." Albert lowered his head. "She lied to me when she said she had gone to the village to look after her aunt. I went to the village yesterday. Mom didn't even show up there. Now I don't know where to find her. I had hoped she lived here." He sighed heavily. "Alas, my hopes were not fulfilled. So I'll keep looking until I find her." "Why did she deceive you?" The woman looked at Albert with interest. "What did you do?" "I turned out to be a soulless son." He inclined his head even lower. "And now I want to make up for that mistake." "Oh, if you knew how many old people live in our house who have been abandoned by their children," the woman sighed. "Everyone has a story to tell. Take Mrs. Anna Smith, who was brought to us after being picked up off the street. She'd been wandering round the town for days, sleeping at the railway station. The old woman said she'd lost her memory. She just called herself Anna, but she could not remember her surname or address where she lived, no matter how they questioned her. She didn't have any ID on her. We'd already given her the name Smith, as well as another name. When she was registered with us, we couldn't even find her relatives," the woman continued. "We don't know her real name or date of birth. She doesn't even receive a pension. We collected clothes for her, as they say, with the whole world, because she came to us with one small purse, which contained almost nothing, not even documents. When she had a bad cold, she repeated only the name Albert in her delirium. We thought it was her son, who must have kicked his mother out of the house when she lost her memory." Albert suddenly remembered that he had found his mum's passport when he was sorting out his papers. So she didn't take it or forgot to put it in her bag. And the name Anna made me suspicious. That was my grandmother's name. "Is this old woman alive?" he asked cautiously. "Can I see her?" Well, the woman rose from her seat. "Come on, I'll show her to you." Albert recognized the old woman sitting on the bed as his mother, who had aged and lost even more weight. "Mum," he called softly. Amelia flinched and turned round. "Albert, my son," she exclaimed, unable to believe her eyes. Mummy, I'm sorry." Albert fell on his knees in front of her and cried. "I am so guilty before you." "Calm down, my darling." Amelia stroked his head with her wrinkled hand. "I knew I would see you again. I believed you'd find me." "Mum, come on, let's go home." "You're not staying here anymore?" "Home?" Amelia looked at her son confused. "But I'll be in the way of everything. I'd rather stay here and you can visit me often." "You won't bother anyone," Albert assured her. "I live alone. I'm preparing for a divorce. I don't want such a wife. We'll live with you again, just the two of us. And sometimes Angelina will come to visit us. Is that your new fiancé? Amelia looked angrily at her son. Angelina is my daughter, he laughed. And your granddaughter, whom you must meet? Albert asked. I have a granddaughter? Amelia was now crying with happiness. Yes, yes, Albert, you do. Amelia fussed. I'll pack quickly and we'll go home. I don't have much stuff, but I have enough. Thank you to the kind people who gave me everything I need. And thank them for not leaving me to die in the street. When Amelia entered her room, she stopped on the threshold, hesitating to go any further. Mum, what are you doing? Albert was surprised. Come in, come in. You're the rightful owner of this place now. I didn't think I'd ever come back here again, she said, looking round. Maybe I should go back to the old people's home. Amelia looked anxiously at her son. Would you make up with Linda and move on with your life? You have a daughter growing up. How will she be without her father? I'll see my daughter, but I won't live with Linda anymore, Albert said. Let's not bring it up again. Come on, I'd better show you your room. He took his mother to the room where Angelina used to live. Now you'll live here and no one will bother you. What about you, son? Amelia got worried. Will you be uncomfortable in a passageway room? What if I have to go to the loo in the middle of the night? I'll go and wake you up. You won't? Albert laughed. I sleep so soundly that a tank will pass by and I won't hear it. Come on, Mum. Make yourself comfortable. And tomorrow you and I will go to the shop to buy you clothes and anything else you need. I'll cook something. You and I are going to eat. And you're going to tell me how you've lived all these years. Albert was just finishing frying potatoes when his phone rang. Linda appeared on the screen. He wrinkled his nose and didn't answer the call. The phone rang again and again. Albert even had to switch it off so it wouldn't interfere with his communication with his mum. After about an hour, someone rang the doorbell. Who the hell is that? Albert grumbled as he clicked the lock. Linda stood on the doorstep. Why don't you answer my calls and messages? She asked indignantly. Do you want me to resent you even more? She pushed Albert away and walked into the hallway. If you apologize to me now, then so be it. Linda looked condescendingly at her husband. I will forgive you, but for the last time. If it happens again, you will never see me again. I don't want to see you now, Albert replied calmly. Why did you come here? Linda noticed her mother-in-law, who came out of her room. What is that one doing in our flat? She pointed at Amelia. That's my mum, Albert frowned. And now she's going to live here with me. And you don't belong here anymore. Go away. He waved his hand towards the door. You have nothing to do with this flat. Then you'll never see our daughter again, Linda used the last argument. I'll terminate your paternity. We'll talk about it in court. Albert was unfazed. No one can stop me from having contact with my child, so calm down and leave. I'll file for divorce myself so you don't have to bother. Albert, Linda suddenly cried, why don't we try to start over? If you want, we can move in with my parents, or rent a flat. Let your mum live here. I'm sorry, but I don't love you anymore, Albert shook his head. And you probably don't love me either. What's the point of having a family like this? Can I at least take the rest of my things? Her voice trembled with excitement. I don't mind. Take it, he allowed. Just hurry up. Mum's tired, and it's time for her to rest. Without saying hello to her mother-in-law, Linda quickly packed everything she needed into bags and went out the door. Son, maybe you shouldn't do that to Linda? Amelia asked cautiously. I don't know what's wrong, said Amelia. There's no such thing as a husband and wife. They had a fight. They make up. No, Mum, I can't do that, Albert shook his head. Remember how Grandma used to say there's heaven in a cage with a sweetheart, so I want to live in love and harmony. And who else but you, Mum, would love me so sincerely and completely unselfishly? You've always loved me more than anyone else in the world. And now I have to take care of you. I'm the happiest man in the world because I have you, Mum.